Chapter 1688, Representative. Chapter 1688, Representative. Ling Han returned, and when he related these words from Mao Dai to the Empress, she was immediately incredibly overjoyed. What she valued the most was naturally her relationship with Ling Han, and that was something that she could not possibly sever, and this filled her with resolve to rather never advance into the severing mundane tier, and be in love with Ling Han until the end of her life. However, in an unexpected turn of events, there was actually an alternative. Striking the heaven and earth was definitely more difficult than dealing a strike to oneself, and the difficulty level was possibly not just a little bit harder, but rather 10 times to over 100 times higher, but she would be able to preserve the emotions she had for Ling Han, and would also be capable of surpassing any ordinary severing mundane tier in terms of battle prowess. To the incredibly proud Empress, this was her only choice, and was also the best choice for her. Without Ding Hu there, Ling Han's days naturally became considerably better than before, but there were also many people that were very cautious and still maintained a distance from Ling Han who knew they might have to join the White Tiger Army in future, right? Their training continued, but only 5 days later, Ling Han, Mao Shuyu, and the others were all gathered. Aside from Ding Xiaoqun, who was not a captain, the other 9 were all captains. Long Gaofei was seated, and he cast his eye on the gathered 10 and said, "I have gathered you today to inform you that you all will be participating in a tournament, and your opponent will be a team from the Azure Dragon Army, White Tiger Army, and Vermilion Bird Army. Tong." He paused and looked to his side. "You will be in charge of explaining the subsequent details." "Yes, sir." Tong agreed respectfully first, and only then did he begin his explanation. As it turned out, there were a total of 237 one-star cities under the jurisdiction of the Black Moon sect, and every few hundred or thousand years or so, they could have these forces under their reign form a team of 10 members to participate in a tournament in Black Moon City, and this was only limited to the Genesis tier. This was the so-called chance for entering into the Dark Moon Army, and if one could rise above the others and gain the recognition of some higher up of the Black Moon sect, they would have a chance of staying in a 2-star city. In future, it was possible that they might even have a chance of going to a 3-star city and gain the notice of the Fu clan. However, it would usually be 3 teams of official troops battling directly. After drawing lots, one of the teams would be skipped over, while the 2 teams that had been drawn would battle first, and the victor would be fighting the team that had been passed over. This final victor would then be able to represent Dark Moon City and participate in the tournament. This time, for the sake of fairness, they decided to add another team, but it was very obvious that if any of the 3 teams of official troops drew Ling Han and his group, they clearly had a massive advantage on their side. Would the official troops be unable to defeat the reserve troops? Ling Han naturally would not think that. Perhaps there were prodigies among prodigies in the official troops, but what would they be worth against him? Too bad, the Empress could not participate. This time, they only chose the captains of the 10 teams. Then why could Ding Xiaoqun be here? The captain of his team claimed to be unwell, so Ding Xiaoqun managed to replace him. Claiming to be unwell? It must have only been the Ding clan using threats and rewards to compel that person to give up his place. If they could win and represented the Dark Moon Army in the tournament, every person would be able to get 100 star stones as reward, and if they could attain a better ranking in the battles in Black Moon City, the reward would be even higher. And the 3 great clans had even announced that if they could get first, every person on their team would be rewarded with a 1-star pseudo-divine medal. You shouldn't think that a 1-star pseudo-divine medal was cheap. On the other hand, if one wanted to perfectly fuse 2 pieces of level 20 godly metal together, the price that had to be paid was huge, and it needed a severing mundane tier elite to temper it for a very long time. Moreover, it was not every severing mundane ancestor that could do it. He had to have extremely high accomplishments in the art of blacksmithing, and this ensured that any 1-star pseudo-divine medal was an incredibly valuable item. Putting aside others, even Ding Xiaoqun felt greed that could not be restrained. If he could obtain a pseudo-celestial tool while he was in the Genesis tier, just how awesome would that be? He had self-awareness. It was possible that he could only advance into the severing mundane tier after more than 100 million years. Thus, the temptation of a pseudo-celestial tool was naturally massive. Otherwise, he would have to wait until he had advanced into the severing mundane tier to be bestowed with a pseudo-celestial tool by his clan. But there was a realistic problem. How were they supposed to compete with the official troops? The latter had cultivated innumerable more years than them, and were very cohesive and coordinated at that, so they were able to fully unleash the maximum battle prowess of all their members, or even higher than that. And them? It had just been a few days, so what kind of cooperation could they have managed to nurture? Furthermore, out of those that could rise above the others in the official troops, which one of them wasn't an invincible elite even among Genesis tiers? There was no end to the Genesis tier, and it was only needed to form a total of 10 billion stars, and that would mean that they had accumulated enough origin power. If their comprehension of the cultivation level was also enough, they could attempt to break through to the severing mundane tier. Thus, power was absolutely the limit before breaking through to 10 billion stars, and it was still a considerable advantage to have a few more million or billion years to cultivate. Of course, after 10 billion stars, it would be increasingly harder to form new stars, just like how every step forward was incredibly difficult after an eternal river tier had formed 1 million stars. Only a prodigy would be able to continue their triumphant progress. The gap in power and the gap in cooperation. Did they even have any hopes of emerging victorious? Even Ding Xiaoqin and Mao Shuyu were shaking their heads. They were only going to be accompanying the victors, and there was no need for them to consider the possibility of winning at all. After returning to make some preparations, they set out on their journey, heading to the camp of the Dark Moon Army. Though they were only characters to accompany the victors, the other three teams were not, so it was natural that the members had to be chosen wisely. They were going to represent Dark Moon City in the tournament, and the three great clans were also very serious, wanting to get the highest possible accomplishment. From a certain aspect, this was also a display of strength of a major city, and was extremely important. The tournament would be held 3 days later, and taking advantage of these 3 days, Ling Han's team of reserve troops would also be making some last-minute preparations. Before the battles began, they still had to have a slight bit of hope that they could win. But it was only a mere 3 days. How could it possibly help them to achieve full-fledged cooperation? Putting aside other issues, merely with the conflict between Ling Han and Ding Xiaoqin, it was impossible for them to achieve any kind of cooperation. 3 days later, they entered into the battlegrounds with expressions of disappointment. They could only think of this as mere procedure. The 4 teams drew lots to decide their respective opponents. Ling Han and his group were represented by Tong, and the final result was that the Azure Dragon Army would face the Vermilion Bird Army, and the White Tiger Army would face the reserve troops. Seeing this kind of result, the Ding clan and the White Tiger Army all smiled. This was equivalent to them having already achieved victory. Unless the Azure Dragon Army and the Vermilion Bird Army reached some kind of agreement, if they really put everything on the line, whichever team won could only possibly be a narrow victory, and if they fought the White Tiger Army next, it was natural that they would lose. This kind of tournament could not possibly alert any powerful figures, but 3 vice-commanders had still appeared, and the severing mundane tier elite of the Ding clan was Ding Hu. When his eyes swept over Ling Han, a flash of killing intent flickered. A mighty severing mundane ancestor actually couldn't do anything to a mere great saint. Humph, if he did not kill this boy, what face would he have left? Begin. The 4 teams came on at the same time. There were 10 people in each team, and the rules were very simple. It would be a battle royale, right until all the members of one side collapsed. Let's admit defeat, Ding Xiaoqin said immediately. Since their opponent was a team from his own clan, he naturally hoped that the White Tiger Army could have as easy a victory as possible. Chapter 1689, Cheering On. Chapter 1689, Cheering On. Just when these words had left Ding Xiaoqin's mouth, he was immediately on the receiving end of disdain from his companions. Was there any other person like him? He was practically a traitor. Actually, Ding Xiaoqin bore a heavy responsibility for deliberately joining this team of reserve troops that could not possibly win. If they had drawn the White Tiger Army as their opponent, Ding Xiaoqin would advise the others to give up the idea of battle to save some effort for the White Tiger Army. But if they had not drawn the White Tiger Army, then he had to attempt to drive up everyone's morale at all costs, and create as much trouble for their opponent as possible so that the White Tiger army would have increased chances of victory. Though they were destined to lose, they were still outstanding characters that had been picked from among the reserve troops and would be sufficient to create some trouble for the official troops. Ling Han glanced disdainfully at Ding Xiaochen. If you don't want to fight, then scram. Don't be a hindrance here and affect team morale. If this had been the battleground, I would have directly removed your head. Ding Xiaochen directed a glare at Ling Han, yet did not talk back. He had suffered at Ling Han's hands once before, and knew that this guy did not only have the strength to suppress him, but would also dare to do so he naturally would not seek his own suffering. He ignored Ling Han and said to the others, I am saying this for your own good. Injuries are inevitable if we go up and fight. In any case, we will definitely lose, so why should we make things difficult for ourselves? I have some star stones here, so does everyone have any interest? This was equivalent to public bribery. Hearing these words from him, a few captains were immediately swayed, but there were also some that were unmoved. For example, Mao Shuyu was almost close to becoming mad with fury, and Wei Bo, Qin Hanyu, and Luo Xinyang were all unmoved. It was unknown whether they thought a few star stones was too paltry a sum, or they were really that upright. Scram! Ling Han said eloquently. With a soft exclamation, Ding Xiaochen's face instantly turned pale, and blood was seeping out of all his apertures. Trash from the reserve troops, will you surrender on your own volition, or would rather we give you a harsh thrashing? The 10 people from the White Tiger army all surrounded them. They were the outstanding figures of this army, and any one of them had been a peak stage Saint King for innumerable years. The number of stars they had formed was unimaginably numerous. One of them looked at Ding Xiaochen and asked, Xiaochen, are you all right? 27th uncle, I am fine. Ding Xiaochen rubbed his face. Though he said he was fine, the hint of shock in his expression was hard to conceal. Blood was actually spilling from his 7 apertures with just a soft rebuke from Ling Han. Just how wide was the gap between the two of them? At first, he thought that he could make up for this gap if he put in more effort, but from the look of things now, the gap between them was like the gap between 2 stars in the skies, and was absolutely unbridgeable. The person that Ding Xiaochen had addressed as 27th uncle was naturally also a member of the Ding clan. His name was Ding Sun, and he had already formed more than 20 billion stars. Though his comprehension of cultivation level was still at the peak stage of Saint King tier, his power was overwhelming. His talent in cultivation was actually not as high as Ding Xiaochen's. It was just that he had been born a few 100 million years earlier, and that was why his battle prowess surpassed the latter's. Ding Xiaochen was a descendant that the clan had focused on nurturing, and was the most likely person in the Ding clan to become a severing mundane ancestor, so he definitely could not meet the slightest mishap. That young man was really brazen to actually dare to harm Ding Xiaochen. Beat them as much as possible, Ding Sun declared coldly. Since the White Tiger army was under the Ding clan's jurisdiction, he naturally was the leader of this team, though his battle prowess might not be the strongest among them. The others naturally would not defy him. That was because joining the White Tiger army meant that they were part of the Ding clan. To speak more frankly, they were their lackeys. The 10 members of the White Tiger team all surrounded them. They had a cooperative technique that could unite the power of all 10 members so that every single person's battle prowess would be further increased by another 3 times at least. This was extremely frightening. In the first place, they were already excellent characters that had been chosen from among the peak stage Saint Kings, and with their battle prowess increased further by another 3 times, just how powerful could they be? A few people whose fighting spirit was not that strong immediately raised their hands and surrender, but Ding Xiaochen did not, and was putting on a pretense of fighting. However, not one member of the White Tiger team made a move to attack him. It was only a mere act. Humph! Luo Xinyang aggressively attacked. He possessed black-scaled armor as protection, so his defenses were extremely strong, so there was no better person than him to become the shield for the team. He turned into a sharp spear that penetrated right into the White Tiger team, wanting to destroy the opponent's formation. Otherwise, if every one of them had increased their battle prowess by 3 times, how were they supposed to fight them? Qin Hanyu, meanwhile, unleash the power of darkness. But this celestial technique of hers did not differentiate between her allies or enemies, and would even injure her own teammates, so everyone was scared into keeping as far away from her as possible. Meanwhile, Wei Bo's figure flashed, and it was as if he could turn himself invisible. In the blink of an eye, he had already advanced a good few meters ahead, and his sword rays shot out. It was like a poisonous snake charging recklessly. Only Ling Han was standing with his arms crossed behind his back, like a pillar of support. Shwa, shwa, shwa. Immediately, 6 battle spears stabbed out. They were all forged from level 20 godly metal, and the points of the spears shone, exuding a frightening coldness. Ling Han shot out a fist. Ding, 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 ding. He was merely using his physical body to confront these battle spears directly, and a dazzling bout of sparks shot out madly. Every punch he delivered would cause the point of a battle spear to shatter. After 6 punches, the 6 battle spears had become 6 iron staffs. Seeing this scene, all the soldiers of the Dark Moon Army that were watching the battles felt a shiver come over their bodies. What kind of physique was this? They were almost frightened to death. Being able to confront a top-grade god tool with bare hands, and it was actually the god tool that was shattered. No. This was no longer something as simple as a strong physique, but rather his battle prowess had also been strengthened to an inconceivable extent. Otherwise, he should only be capable of ensuring that he himself was unharmed. Freak. He's definitely a freak. On the high platform, the severing mundane ancestors from the Long clan and Duan clan both opened their eyes at the same time, focusing on Ling Han. They naturally had their own informers in the reserve troops, and the 10 military instructors belonged to the 3 great clans respectively. They had also heard reports that a 3.5 stars aptitude prodigy had appeared among the reserve troops this time. The 2 great clans had already prepared their plans to entice him, and the matter of Mao Dai transferring Ding Hu away also had their support. Otherwise, with the amount of control they had over the Dark Moon Army, even if Mao Dai wanted to execute this order by force, it could not have been accomplished so quickly. But only now that they had seen Ling Han's strength with their own eyes did they realize that they had still underestimated Ling Han's natural talent. Their original plans had to be abandoned. This young man was worth them paying a higher price to pull him in under their banner. Ho, the Ding clan was really funny. They were actually unwilling to pull in such a young king tier into their ranks, and instead were proactively pushing him onto their opposing side. This was practically idiotic. This was good too. Precisely because there were idiots like the Ding clan, they would have one less opponent when they competed over Ling Han in future. However, they would still have to prevent the Ding clan from harming him. After all, Genesis tier was too fragile, and if a severing mundane tier wanted to make a move on him, then there really were 10,000 ways that he could achieve this goal. In the battlegrounds, the 10 members of the White Tiger team all received a terrible shock by Ling Han's frightening strength. Was this really a rookie soldier? Some of them had previously represented Dark Moon City to participate in the tournament at Black Moon City before, and they could only imagine that perhaps only the young prodigies of the Black Moon sect could possibly have such battle prowess. Ding Sun's eyes were poisonous, and he signaled at Ding Xiaochen. The latter immediately nodded. Chapter 1690. The Plot of a Vile Character. Chapter 1690. The Plot of a Vile Character. Ding Xiaochen had a second mission. If he was unable to convince the others, he would take the job of a planted agent and stab the others in the back. I was your teammate, so would you keep your guard up against me? Ding Xiaochen stared at Ling Han's back, his eyes menacing. This man caused him utter humiliation and had to be gotten rid of. Otherwise, he would become a thorn in his heart, and that was going to be fatal when he broke through to the severing mundane tier. Not only would it affect his breakthrough, it could even cause him to be wounded by the Great Tao. Breaking through was an incredibly dangerous thing in the first place, so how could he survive it if his Tao heart was not stable? Now that everyone was battling fiercely, how could Ling Han have possibly imagined that his teammate would turn around and attack him? Oh, he would get his revenge later? Sorry, this was a battle royale, and we hadn't broken in our cooperation for many days, So wouldn't it be a very normal thing to happen if our cooperation didn't work that well? Worst came to worst, he would just have to get some punishment, but that was fine. With the interference of the Ding clan, the matter would definitely be turned into a small problem, and a small problem was no problem at all. He hadn't done it on purpose, after all, right? Ding Xiaoqian summoned the green wooden saber, and as a murderous aura surged, the image of a man-eating tree appeared. This was a spiritual body, but its might was not weak in the slightest. He activated it to the fullest, and when the might of the divine saber had been maximized, he suddenly struck, delivering a slash at a member of the White Tiger team. That person understood his intentions and immediately jumped towards Ling Han. In this way, this strike from Ding Xiaoqian would be openly directed at Ling Han's back. When the saber light was about to reach Ling Han, only then did Ding Xiaoqian loudly call out, "Watch out! Watch out your sister!" Seeing this scene, the Vermilion Bird Army and Azure Dragon Army around them almost hurled out curses. Your acting is really too fake, isn't it? This strike is clearly heading for Ling Han directly, and you actually pretend to call out, "Watch out." They were really treating others like fools. With that little bit of distance, how was Ling Han supposed to dodge? Nobody saw that a cold smirk turned up the corners of Ling Han's lips. He had already expected that Ding Xiaoqian would betray them. Otherwise, why would Ding Xiaoqian have insisted on joining them when participating in this kind of tournament did not have the slightest benefit, and they would only be defeated terribly? However, with how strong Ling Han's present abilities were, even if he had not anticipated it in advance, it was still all right. Don't assume that he was fighting against 7 people all on his own, and bore the majority of the firepower of the White Tiger team with difficulty. In truth, he was still very much at ease, and had not completely displayed his full battle prowess yet. A saber strike slashed over, and the blade of the saber had yet to reach him when that tree spirit first entwined around Ling Han, wanting to devour his body and spirit. If Ling Han's spirit had been possessed, he would definitely be incapable of avoiding the upcoming strike. This was a top-grade god tool. What Saint King would be able to hold up against it? You had used your bare fists to shatter god tools, and that possibly had been that you had channeled some kind of cultivation technique to protect your fist, but if your spirit was possessed, how would you be able to channel any kind of cultivation technique? A vengeful smile appeared on Ding Xiaoqian's lips. With this strike, even if Ling Han did not die, he would be severely wounded. The strike had arrived. Ling Han suddenly turned around. Clang! He stretched out his hand and took hold of the green wooden saber. A mocking smirk appeared on his lips, and he suddenly gave a shove. Ka, ka, ka. The sound of bones shattering rang out, and Ding Xiaoqian's 2 arms and the bones in them had all been shattered forcefully, completely unable to resist the powerful strength that Ling Han had exerted. At this instant, Ding Xiaoqian's expression was very expressive. Not only was his face filled with agony, it was also covered with shock. In his eyes, this was something that should not have happened. Ling Han wasn't defeated even like this. Pooh! The green wooden saber crashed backwards, the blunt hilt slammed onto his chest, and the sound of bones breaking rang out once more. The defense of the skin of a Saint King was rendered completely useless, and the saber's hilt directly penetrated his flesh and blood into his chest, creating a massive bloody hole. A vicious glint flashed in Ling Han's eyes, yet he did not follow it up with another strike. He calmly asked, "If you hurt others, it will eventually come back to you. Aren't you worried that if you do too many shameful deeds, ghosts will come knocking at your door at midnight?" Pa! Ding Xiaoqian flopped onto the ground, his head covered with cold sweat and face as pale as paper. His heart had been burst by the green wooden saber, and large amounts of divine blood were gushing out. This caused tremendous damage to his life force and directly affected his time of breaking through to the severing mundane tier. But if Ling Han had followed up with another punch, he presently would not have just been injured, but rather would have died. "How dare you, murderer!" Ding Hu immediately leaped to his feet and was about to make a move to attack Ling Han. "Brother Ding Hu, what need is there to be angry?" The severing mundane tier from the Long clan, Long Chungren, asked calmly, but his palm had already stretched out, closing off the path of Ding Hu's move. The severing mundane ancestor from the Duan clan, Duan Wan, also stood up. He crossed his arms over his chest with a smile and said, "This is a competition, so death and injury is inevitable. Furthermore, this is only a minor injury." Minor injury? Even his heart had been burst, and this was still a minor injury? What did the heart mean for a cultivator? It was the place where blood essence was stored, and that was why there was something called heart's blood. And now that his heart had burst, his blood essence would definitely have emptied out completely, which would also cause severe damage to his life force. Ding, whose expression was livid, but with two great severing mundane ancestors clearly expressing that they would make trouble for him if he dared to move, he had no choice but to suppress his fury. If there was only one, he would not be afraid, but with two severing mundane tears, ho-ho. He sat back down heavily, lowering his eyes. Those were capable of murder. If he swept his eyes over any Genesis tear, they would only be rent into pieces. The others had also broken out in a commotion. They had not thought that there would be such a dramatic turn of events. They all thought that even if Ling Han did not die, he would be severely wounded with this strike. But it was only a blink of an eye, and the one who was heavily injured had turned into Ding Xiaochen. "If you're injured, then obediently rest on the sidelines." Ling Han shot out a kick. Pong! Ding Xiaochen was immediately kicked out. He had turned into a ball and rolled over a dozen times before finally stopping. Ding Xiaochen was really pitiful. He had been heavily injured in the first place, and with another blow like this, he was angry, humiliated, and pained all at the same time. He spat out a mouthful of blood and directly passed out. Ling Han looked towards the 10 members of the White Tiger team that were already dumbfounded, broke into a grin, and asked, "Why are you all being so nice? Not fighting anymore? Being nice your sister. Who wants to be nice to you? We were all scared by you, all right? Are you fuck really a Saint King? Are you fuck really a rookie soldier? Why do you seem to be a few hundred times stronger than even veteran soldiers?" Taking advantage of this opening when they were all dumbfounded, Mao Shuyu, Wei Bo, and the others took the chance to attack. Pong, pong, pong. They instantly defeated 3 of them, and the remaining 7 had lost their courage completely. As long as Ling Han was still standing there, who could match him? The White Tiger team admitted defeat. At first, the conclusion of this battle was assumed to be completely assured, and it was going to be absolutely one-sided. In truth, it had indeed been completely assured, and was absolutely one-sided, but the position of victor and loser were exchanged. The reserve troops had actually defeated the official troops. Everyone's eyes were focused on Ling Han. It was this man that had single-handedly created this miracle. Ding, whose expression was dark, and his hands were balled tightly into fists. One could see there were veins popping on his forehead, and grinding sounds could be heard from his knuckles because of how tightly his hands were clenched. At this moment, his killing intent towards Ling Han had surged to the top. "We won." Mao Shuyu immediately cheered. Among the few of them, it was her personality that was the most hot-tempered and vibrant, unlike the composed Wei Bo and the others. However, this was an unexpected victory, and even Wei Bo and the others broke into slight smiles. The few team members that had wanted to surrender even before fighting all bore expressions of embarrassment, but they could not hide their exuberant joy. As long as they had Ling Han's fierce power on their side, it was completely no issue for them to represent Dark Moon City in the upcoming tournament. Chapter 1691, Fighting Azure Dragon Team. Chapter 1691, Fighting Azure Dragon Team. As long as they could represent Dark Moon City in the tournament, they would be able to gain a reward of 100 star stones, and if they could get a high ranking, then they would get a further reward of a 1-star pseudo-divine medal. There was hope, there really was hope. Their battle with the White Tiger team had ended too quickly. At this moment, the Azure Dragon team and Vermilion Bird team were still battling fiercely. In fact, because the battle was too fierce and tight, they did not even know what had just happened. Perhaps some of them had glimpsed that the battle on this side had already ended, but wasn't that very normal? How could the reserve team be a match for the White Tiger team? Ling Han and his group descended and rested, waiting for the victor to emerge between the Azure Dragon team and the Vermilion Bird team. This was an evenly matched battle. Both sides were very strong, and Mao Shuyu and the others would occasionally gasp at their performance. That was how fierce the battle was. Yet Ling Han felt very bored. Aside from those whose strength was not too far from his, a battle of Saint King tiers was really completely insufficient to capture his interest. They battled straight through a whole day and night, and only then did this battle finally conclude. The victor was the Azure Dragon team. The reason the Azure Dragon team managed to emerge victorious was because they had a very strong captain, the prodigy of the Duan clan, Duan Jun. Unlike Ding Xiaoqian, who had entered into the army just to court a woman, Duan Jun was a born fanatic of martial arts and enjoyed battle. He had only joined the Dark Moon army for 300,000 years, but he had fought in no less than 3 million battles, both big and small. This was equivalent to going out to fight at least every month. This frequency was astonishingly high. Yet this was the path of cultivation that was the most suited for him. In a short 300,000 years, he had already completed the transformation from a rookie of the reserve troop to a captain of the Azure Dragon Army. He was known as the top elite of the Azure Dragon Army and the most likely person in the Duan clan to break through to the Severing Mundane tier. His battle prowess was clearly superior to that of the others, but because this was a team battle, individual strength was not that important. Hence, the Azure Dragon team only managed to gain victory after going through a tough battle. He was like Ling Han, whose strength had exceeded the standards that a Saint King should have, and his individual strength was enough to overwhelm his whole team. When the Azure Dragon team found out that their next opponent was the reserve team, all of their expressions were brilliant. How was that possible? When they probed for the exact details of the battle circumstances, a strong vigilance against Ling Han naturally rose up in them. He turned the battle situation completely around with his individual strength. This was too frightening. After the Azure Dragon army rested for a while, the final battle immediately began. All the others are trash. We just have to defeat that brat called Ling Han, Duan Jun said loudly. Though we are all weary, though our battle prowess is not at its prime, we just have to grit our teeth, and victory is right in front of us. Azure Dragon, victory for all battles. The other 9 team members all called out their slogan. Under the leadership of Duan Jun, the 10 of them approached. Mao Shuyu and the others automatically stood behind Ling Han. Only Ding Xiaoqian was unable to participate in the battle because his injuries were too severe. They were only left with 9 of their members. Charge! The moment Duan Jun had entered into battle mode, he became mad. His eyes were bloodshot, and his fighting spirit had solidified. He directly shot out, brandishing a massive battle axe in his hands, and directly delivering a strike right onto Ling Han. Behind him, his 9 teammates had all instilled their own power into Duan Jun. This was a little like the power of the nation, but there was no so-called power of the nation in the celestial realm. There had never been any major sect that would draw on power of the nation, because after one had become Severing Mundane tier, they would have severed their mortal bonds. So how could they have been able to draw power from mere mortals? With the power boost, Duan Jun was incredibly strong. His whole body was exuding golden light, like he was an invincible god of war, and his strike had already been delivered. Ling Han stretched out a finger and tapped out at the battle axe. The whole scene seemed to have slowed down. Everyone could clearly see the battle axe descend, and his finger greet the incoming blow. Then, the 2 of them clashed, and the scene that had slowed down instantly froze. This time, it did not just seem to, but had really frozen. Ling Han's finger had stopped the battle axe. It was just a single finger, but it was as if it was a divine metal that had existed for eons and would not be damaged or broken. Duan Jun inhaled sharply, yet suddenly released a loud roar, pushing his power to its fullest. The battle axe trembled lightly, and an eye actually opened on the body of the axe, looking towards Ling Han. This glance was like the stare of the death of God, causing a tremble in Ling Han's heart and actually rendered him immobile. Duan Jun abandoned the battle axe and shot out a punch right at Ling Han's face, wanting to take advantage of this hard-earned chance to get rid of Ling Han. And for the sake of having this battle axe open its eye, His 9 teammates that had been giving him a power boost immediately swayed and collapsed onto the ground. They had lost their battle prowess. Mao Shuyu and the others all roared out in fury and made their move. As long as they could stop Duan Jun, they would definitely win, but if it was the opposite, and Duan Jun was successful, then without Ling Han there, even if there were still 8 of them, Duan Jun would be able to deal with every single one of them. But would they make it in time? The opponent's target was extraordinarily clear. The moment they moved, their target was Ling Han. Furthermore, though Ling Han was the main target of their offensive, they had also been affected a bit by the battle axe's eye, and their movements had been an instant slower. For elites like them to exchange blows, could they afford this instant? Duan Jun's fist had arrived, yet he saw Ling Han show him a smile. Gasp! In this instant, all the hair on Duan Jun's body was standing on ends. At this moment, Ling Han's spirit should have been completely intimidated, and since it was as if his spirit was dead, he naturally could not possibly raise even a finger. Without the soul, the physical body would only be an empty shell. But Ling Han was actually smiling at him. Fuck, this was really too creepy. But now, would he be able to stop? There was only this one chance. He gritted his teeth, and his fist still fell. Ling Han moved. Though the battle axe opening its eye had indeed caused him some slight impediment, it was really negligible. In a mere instant, he had already recovered. He very casually scissored his hands, and his 2 fingers clamped around Duan Jun's wrist. The latter's fist was unable to advance the slightest bit further. All around them, everyone was dumbfounded and open-mouthed. Ling Han actually dealt so easily with such a powerful attack? Just how strong was this guy? At this moment, the attacks of Mao Shuyu and the others were finally delivered. Pong, pong, pong. They all landed on Duan Jun and sent him flying. However, Duan Jun's strength was also extremely shocking. Being struck simultaneously by 8 people, he actually was still capable of standing back up, though there was a trace of blood at the corner of his lips, and he appeared to be very weak. But even so, this was stunning enough. No wonder Duan Jun was able to become the most powerful person in the Azure Dragon Army. There would be no other person that could do the same thing as he could. Ling Han did not count. He had already far surpassed this level. Ha 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 ha, impressive. Duan Jun laughed loudly. As he laughed, he was still coughing up blood, yet he was completely uncaring, nor did he show any humiliated expression at having been defeated. What is your name? He asked Ling Han. Ling Han. Ling Han, Duan Jun mumbled to himself, and then loudly called out, All right, I will remember you. When you have time, we can share some wine and court girls together. Chapter 1692, Deciding the Plan. Chapter 1692, Deciding the Plan. This guy was really not pretentious at all. Ling Han nodded and replied, We can share wine, but forget about courting girls. Ha ha ha, what meaning is there in merely drinking wine together? Duan Jun scoffed immediately. Are you so lacking in charm that no women are willing to throw themselves into your arms, so you are afraid of being humiliated? Don't worry, just follow me, Brother Jun, and I guarantee that women will love you. At this time, Duan Jun couldn't help but cough. It's enough that you lost, and you are still publicly asking the other to share wine and court girls together with you here. Is that really proper? But that's fine too. The friendship between men is developed through sharing wine and courting women together. Ling Han was definitely worth attracting, and Duan Jun's ability to make friends had always been trustworthy. The competition ended, and the reserve team had emerged victorious in a manner that no one could have possibly imagined, achieving the first place. They had also won the chance to participate in the major tournament in Black Moon City and the qualification to compete with prodigies that had come from over 200 other cities. This was too unexpected. Initially, allowing the reserve team to take part was for the sake of balance and fairness, but who would have imagined that this year's reserve team would actually be so powerful in truth? It was completely because of a single person that they forcefully took the first place. The 3 great clans all began a discussion centered around Ling Han. Both the Long clan and Duan clan undoubtedly prepared amazing conditions to draw Ling Han into their camp. As for the Ding clan, they conducted a fierce debate, discussing whether they would execute a strategy of beating down on Ling Han or to attract him into their ranks. In the end, the strategy to beat down on Ling Han got the upper hand because the relations the Ding clan had with Ling Han were already very poor. So even if they tried to draw him, they would definitely have less competitive power than the Duan clan and Long clan. So they might as well snip this bud while it had yet to bloom, and there was no need for further argument. Just look, Mao Dai's appearance had already affected the balance between the three great clans. Whichever clan he joined, that clan's strength would rise above the others because Mao Dai had a very high chance of becoming a fourth Severance Grand Elder. Without a doubt, as long as Ling Han managed to mature, he was practically a second Mao Dai, or perhaps even better. Just thinking that a day like that would come, the Ding clan felt slightly anxious. Don't forget, Mao Dai still has an unmarried daughter. Ding Hu naturally supported the idea of becoming enemies with Ling Han. He menacingly said, a few days ago, it was also Mao Dai's personal command that transferred me out of the reserve camp, and he even summoned that brat for a personal audience. Hiss, what you mean is that Mao Dai also has his eye on this brat, and has the intention to marry off his daughter to him? Ding Gang, who was also a first Severance Grand Elder, exclaimed in surprise. The higher-ups all looked at each other, and they could see the seriousness in each other's expressions. Mao Dai has 3.5 stars aptitude, and would advance into the fourth Severance in less than a few 100 million years. And that damn brat also has 3.5 stars aptitude, and I even suspect that he had not shown his full potential. His true aptitude should be above even this. By then, 2 fourth Severance Grand Elders would appear in the Mao clan, and the power structure of Dark Moon City would have to be rewritten. Even as strong as the Ding clan was, they only had a single fourth Severance Grand Elder, and that was Ding Yaolong. Though a few fourth Severance Grand Elders had appeared continuously in the history of the Ding clan, they all did not manage to cross over the step of dividing soul tier, and ultimately died in the Immortals' tribulation. In the celestial realm, time was still incredibly valuable. Even if you had an endless lifespan, if you could not ensure that your cultivation level continued to advance, you would ultimately be taken back by the heaven and earth. Mao Dai has a disciple that is quite interested in Mao Dai's little girl, Ding Yaolong said suddenly. Ancestor, what you mean is to think of a way to have Mao Dai's disciple and that girl from the Mao clan to become husband and wife? Ding Hu asked respectfully. In that manner, Ling Han could not possibly become Mao Dai's firm ally. Ding Yaolong smiled calmly and said, no, think of a way to have Ling Han and the little girl of Mao clan become a couple. Ah. All the higher-ups exchanged looks, feeling baffled. Weren't they afraid that Mao Dai would become allies with Ling Han? The two of them both had 3.5 stars aptitude, and if they were allied, they could be nature-defying. Pa, someone broke out in applause and laughed out loud. Smart, this is really smart. This move from Ancestor is really incredibly smart. All the higher-ups turned to look at that person. You don't have to be so gross in how you're sucking up to Ancestor, right? That person explained, the key is that the disciple of Mao Dai, Zhang Chong, right, likes that little girl of the Mao clan very much. If we could have Ling Han, that damn brat, defile the little girl of the Mao clan, just think, what would Zhang Chong do? Kill that brat, of course, someone immediately answered. Haha, then wouldn't this lead to internal strife between Mao Dai and Ling Han? Even if Mao Dai thought that what was done, and just made the best of things by marrying his daughter to Ling Han, would Zhang Chong be able to take this lying down? This guy could apparently advance into the severing mundane tier this time round, and by then, killing Ling Han would merely be a piece of cake for him. Hee. These higher-ups all laughed. This was what was called killing 2 birds with 1 stone. As for how much hurt Mao Shuyu would endure in this matter, how could that be any consideration of these people? In their eyes, there was only profit. For the sake of profit, they could even sacrifice their own clansmen. What more when it was an outsider? Then we will execute this plan after Zhang Chong advances into the severing mundane tier to ensure that there will be no mistakes. With Ling Han's strong insistence, the Empress went with him, heading to Black Moon City. How could he not bring her along with him? By now, Ling Han was completely hostile with the Ding clan, and if he left, what if the Ding clan harmed the Empress? In front of a severing mundane ancestor, no matter how much a prodigy the Empress was, she would not have any ability to resist. Ling Han did not want anything that would cause him eternal regret to happen. Even if the Empress had to become a military deserter, he would bring her with him inside the Black Tower. Thankfully, the great commander of the Dark Moon Army was Mao Dai. Though he was merely a figurehead, he still had that little bit of power. Duan Jun had indeed pulled Ling Han along with him to have wine, and even invited more than a dozen delicate beauties who were also very unreserved from a few minor clans of the city. When they saw Ling Han and Duan Jun, they would call them Brother Jun and Brother Han, looking like they were ready to accept their advances as long as they were willing. Duan Jun set himself free completely, having a woman on either side of him and taking full advantage of them. However, he did not go too far and did not overdo things with these women, which made these delicate misses all feel very resentful. Ling Han was even more direct. He was cold and kept all of them at a very far distance. To be honest, even if he was the lascivious type, with such an exquisite beauty like the Empress, would he still be attracted by such mediocre beauties? Duan Jun was quite a likable person. He was incredibly outspoken, and not the type to beat around the bush with his words. This was very suited to Ling Han's tastes. Thus, the two of them had a great conversation and drank to their heart's content. After preparing for 10 days, the 10 members of the reserve troops led by Long Gaofei set out, heading towards Black Moon City. They boarded a large ship. Otherwise, the time needed for the journey on foot would be much too long. This was the celestial realm. That mediocre speed of Genesis tier was really inadequate. The large ship was huge. It was as long as 30,000 meters, and also a few thousand meters wide. If it stood upright, then it would be a majestic mountain. But in this great lake that was akin to an ocean, this was not the slightest bit eye-catching. The waves swept towards them, and the body of the ship swayed strongly. Even Ling Han's expression shifted slightly at that feeling of power. This was definitely something that could threaten his godly bones. Chapter 1693, Black Moon City. Chapter 1693, Black Moon City. The waves crashed into the ship's body, and it would cause the ship to sway wildly every time. Even if Mao Shuyu, Wei Bo, and the others were all at the consummate level of the Genesis tier, they still felt an uncomfortable feeling of dizziness and wanting to vomit. Ling Han and the Empress were still fine. Once they locked their doors, they could hide in the Black Tower, so who cared about the waves? The person who lived a secluded life was Ding Xiaochen. Not only had he lost to Ling Han successively, he had even publicly undermined him, so what face would he have left to face the others? However, he was really thick-skinned. He still came brazenly because this was also an opportunity for him. Black Moon City, a 2-star city. Don't think that there was only a gap of 1 level between 1 star and 2 stars. There was also just a gap of 1 level between the Celestial King tier and Ascending Origin tier, but just how massive was the gulf between the 2 cultivation levels exactly? What if he encountered a dividing Soul tier elite in Black Moon City and gained his favor, with the latter wanting to take him in as a son-in-law or disciple? Then, wouldn't he achieve meteoric success? In theory, he could only achieve the 3rd severance at most, but if a dividing Soul tier elite was willing to provide his valuable assistance, then the possibility of him achieving the 4th severance was extremely high. The gap of 1 severance was possibly the difference of 10 billion years of lifespan and being able to survive the Immortal's tribulation a few more times. Thus, even if Ding Xiaochen had to endure disdain from all the others, he would not give up this chance. The ship traveled very quickly, almost matching the speed of a full-out sprint from Ling Han. If it did not anchor midway, it would only need about a month's time to reach Black Moon City. However, this large ship was not for the sole purpose of sending Ling Han and his group. It also had the task of transporting cargo. Every time they arrived at the next city, a large amount of cargo would be unloaded from the ship, and a large amount of cargo would also be loaded onto the ship. Then, they would proceed to the next city. With such delays, the journey would have to take about 2 months' time. Ling Han sat underneath the reincarnation tree, continuing to comprehend regulations. In the celestial realm, the spiritual qi was incredibly dense. It could at least ensure that a cultivator's rate of advancement would be maintained at an astonishingly high speed before celestial level. Of course, the prerequisite was that his comprehension of regulations would have to follow through. Otherwise, no matter how beneficial the environment for cultivation was, it would be pointless. And with the help of the reincarnation tree, it was equivalent to bestowing a pair of wings to Ling Han that would allow him to soar. He had just entered into the celestial realm for these few days, and he had already reached the peak stage of the Great Saint tier. He only had to accumulate some more origin power, settle his appreciation, and he would be able to break through to the Saint King tier. By then, he was sure that even if it was a male or female saint from the major sects, as long as they were in the same cultivation level, he would still be able to suppress them easily. He was still drinking the heavenly tribulation fluid and comprehending the lightning element regulations, turning it into his own mystical power. Of course, he also left some for the Empress and the others. Because of physique, the others would only be able to consume it after entering into the severing mundane tier. Furthermore, Ling Han only planned to give it to the Empress and the Rain Emperor. That was because their natural talent at cultivation was outstanding. If it was given to the others, that would really be biting off more than they could chew. It would instead hinder their cultivation level, and that would be too much of a waste. Ling Han deepened his comprehension of extermination lightning, and the power of destruction was becoming more and more terrifying. However, lightning flash was not improved further. Instead, he had an additional mystical power, and Ling Han called it cracking light sphere. He could throw out a sphere of lightning, and then control its explosion as he willed, producing a frightening destructive power. It could impact all the targets around him, but could not differentiate between allies and enemies, because this was an attack that had already been launched. However, if he was to use this technique, he would need to accumulate lightning regulations from around him, and the more time he spent on accumulation, the greater its power would be, but it could not surpass a certain upper limit, or it would explode before he managed to throw it out. The Empress's advancement was even faster than his, but she was still slightly stalled by the barrier of cultivation level of the Saint King tier. She probably would break through before he did, but it would not be too many days earlier. 2 months later, the ship safely arrived at Black Moon City. Ling Han stood at the bow of the ship and looked at the large city that had suddenly appeared in front of them. He couldn't help but be stunned, because this large city was floating in midair. No matter how he looked at it, it was a great star, and there were also multiple smaller stars orbiting around it, but upon closer look, those were not small stars, but rather multiple gigantic meteors. Like floating islands, there were tall structures erected on every meteor and presented a grand sight. Black Moon City was above, and there was also another city on ground level that was astonishingly huge. It could match Dark Moon City in size, but compared with Black Moon City, it was pitifully small. This was the secondary city of Black Moon City. Usually, all traveling merchants and visitors would have to first undergo application for entry in this secondary city, and after their application was approved, there would be a specialized path to the main city. To directly fly up without permission? Then just wait to be blasted into smithereens. Entering the secondary city did not involve that many rules. One only had to pay for his accommodations and meals, or any other expenses. This payment was not made in gold and silver, but rather star stones. They first found an inn to stay in. Even if they were representing Dark Moon City in the tournament, they still had to write a report to apply for entry into the city, which would go through multiple levels of approval. It would take about 10 days or so to be approved. Since they were already here, they might as well take a walk around. Though this was just a secondary city, the grade of food and entertainment here were several levels higher than in Dark Moon City. For example, as long as you could pay, you would be able to even consume the meat of immortal beasts. Ling Han very much wanted to try immortal beast meat, but when he found out the price, he gave up the idea. 20,000 star stones for a single plate, and there were only 7 or 8 pieces of meat which were not that much thicker than a piece of paper on the plate. It was said that consuming immortal beast meat could greatly increase the accumulation of origin power, and even let one obtain celestial-level shards of great Tao to assist in the appreciation of regulations. This really was a good thing, But the price was also overwhelmingly high. How many people could really afford a meal like that? Even a first severance grand elder like Long Gaofei would only get about 100 star stones every year without any extra income. He would have to wait a whole 200 years' time just to have a single serving of immortal beast meat. Forget it. He would just come eat when he had the funds in future. This woman has a very attractive figure. Just when Ling Han and the Empress planned to leave, they heard a voice filled with vulgarity ring out behind them. It came from a young man that looked to be only in his 20s. Take off the veil on your face and let me take a good look. I'll treat you to a meal of immortal beast meat. The Empress cast a glance at him and waved her fingers. What she meant was scram. I can't even be bothered to talk to you. Her slender hand was like soft grass, her fingers like green onions, and incredibly tempting. That young man was already staring in infatuation and couldn't help but stretch out his hand to touch the Empress's slender hand and said, "Woman, let me touch your hand. I am extremely accurate in my technique of feeling bones." The Empress's slender brow wrinkled, and she pressed out a palm. Pong! A powerful force surged out, and that young man immediately rolled backwards like he was a ball. He overturned many walls before he finally stopped, and his limbs were all drooping by then. He had passed out. Ling Han smiled slightly and said, "Come, let's walk around someplace else." They did not take this matter to heart. As they saw it, this young man could not possibly be any rich and powerful descendant in Black Moon City. Otherwise, he would not have come to the secondary city. The highest possibility was that he had come with his seniors to participate in the major tournament of Black Moon City. Chapter 1694, Fierce and Uncivilized Siblings. Chapter 1694, Fierce and Uncivilized Siblings. Ling Han and the Empress walked around casually in the secondary city, finding out some information regarding Black Moon City. In truth, it was not easy to enter into a 2-star city and above. It was not something that could be done just by paying an entrance fee. Of course, the entrance fee into the city still had to be paid, but one would also need a special reason. For example, if you were a resident of the city, or if you had been invited. Want to enter into the city as you like? No way. Even traders could not possibly enter Black Moon City and could only hand over their goods in the secondary city. It was rumored that the cultivation environment in Black Moon City was 10 times better than the Dark Moon cities. If they opened their doors wide, then even if Black Moon City was incredibly gigantic, it would definitely be flooded with people. However, this kind of restriction also had another purpose, and that was to show the lofty position of a 2-star city. If everyone could simply enter the Imperial Palace as they liked, then what prestige would be left? The celestial realm had immortal substance. As long as one entered the severing mundane tier and managed to survive the immortal's tribulation repeatedly, they would theoretically possess an endless lifespan. And in truth, this was greatly beneficial to every single person. Because they were breathing in immortal substance constantly, it was preserved inside their bodies, and every person's lifespan would be greatly higher than that of the living beings of the ancient realm. Here, even a person who had never cultivated before could live 5 to 6 centuries, and Genesis tiers were even able to reach 5 or 6 billion years old. Black Moon City had a giant formation to gather the spiritual chi and immortal substance from the surroundings, and if one resided in the city for an extended period, their rate of advancement in cultivation would not only be swift, their lifespan would also be longer. Wasn't the reason why cultivators cultivated precisely to snatch more years of life from the heavens? These reasons added together made a 2-star city something that everyone would scramble madly for, and even a rich kid like Ding Xiaochen wanted to squeeze in at all costs. And this was only a 2-star city, so what about a 3-star city? A 4-star city? A 5-star city? After they had walked around enough, Ling Han and the Empress headed back to their inn. Yet they were only halfway there when an aggressive woman stood in their way. "So you were the ones who beat my brother?" This woman's killing intent was blazing. She was extremely enchanting in appearance and could be considered a top beauty. Of course, she was no match for the Empress. "Sister, they were the ones who beat me." There was a badly battered young man standing beside her, pointing angrily at Ling Han and the Empress. It was the guy who had wanted to take liberties with the Empress previously, yet was sent flying with a single slap from her. This pair of siblings was quite interesting, speaking in concert with each other. The woman humphed and declared, "Each of you break your arm and kowtow to my brother in my apology, and I can spare your lives." "Sister, I want that woman." The young man pointed at the Empress. Though he had not seen the Empress's true features, just by looking at the Empress's captivating figure, his heart burned with fire, and he was determined to possess her. An indulgent expression flashed over the woman's face, and she nodded and replied, all right, whatever Bauer wants." She turned to look at Ling Han and the Empress again and frowned. "What are you two waiting for?" Ling Han couldn't help but shake his head and asked, "Are the two of you retards?" "Retards are nothing to fear, but if you run around despite knowing the fact that you are retards, that would be your fault." "What a wicked mouth!" the woman rebuked, and delivered a slap towards Ling Han. "In front of me, Lu Muyu, what right do you two have to be arrogant?" Ling Han delivered a casual strike, and easily resolved this blow from Lu Muyu. He calmly said, "Without asking for reason, you are immediately finding fault, and even want to break our arms, and make us kowtow and apologize. How ridiculous. If this was merely being arrogant, then what when your brother wants to take my wife by force, and you actually agree? This has really refreshed my perception of people." He broke into a grin and said, "I have decided to capture you and simply hand you over to any single man as his wife, so you can also have a taste of that experience. Furthermore, it will also solve the life problem of a single man." "How dare you?" Lu Muyu sneered and struck out another palm. This time, her attack was filled with anger, so her power was considerably greater than before. The force of her strike turned into a crescent blade that was entwined with regulations of great Tao. Multiple patterns dazzled the skies and was very frightening. This woman was really reckless. Even if the structures in the celestial realm were sturdy, the full power attack of a Genesis tier would still cause massive damage. She did not care that this was a street in a busy marketplace at all, and attacked just because she wanted to. Ling Han's expression cooled. Using lightning flash, he had already suddenly appeared in front of Lu Muyu. Pa! He had delivered a slap. He did not feel that his anger was vented enough with just one slap, and threw another slap with the back of his hand. Pa! After these two slaps landed, Lu Muyu's exquisite face was instantly swollen, and her hair was disheveled. What beauty did she have left? All that was left was malevolence. She glared viciously at Ling Han, and a majestic light flickered in her hands. She had summoned a precious sword. This was really a previous sword. The sword's blade was covered densely with patterns of great Tao, as if it was the sword of an emperor, exuding an endless aura of dignity. Even Ling Han was slightly moved. This definitely was no ordinary Saint King tier weapon. Its power definitely surpassed that standard, but it seemed to still be very far from severing mundane tier. It seemed to have been tempered by a severing mundane ancestor, but had not truly ascended to the level of severing mundane tier. It should have been forged from half-star pseudo-divine metal, so even if there was a severing mundane ancestor involved, it was still unable to attain the level of the first severance. Die! Lu Muyu brandished the sword and struck at Ling Han. The sword chi was biting cold, like great Tao itself was in a rage. Multiple flashes of sword chi were all formed from patterns of great Tao. This destructive power was definitely terrifying. Ling Han did not dare be careless. He had not defended against this kind of precious tool before. Immediately, he clenched his hands into fists and struck back at the sword chi. His present physique had also reached the extent of half-star pseudo-divine metal, so he did not fear a head-on clash like this. Boom, boom, boom. The force of his punches clashed with the sword chi, and it would result in a blinding flash every time, as if the heavens and earth were being split apart. After only a few moves, Ling Han had free rein. If the power of this divine sword could be unleashed fully, then it would definitely be capable of contending against him. What was unfortunate was that a tool was only a tool, after all, so how could it be any match for a human? He advanced aggressively, and easily took this sword from his opponent's hands by force. He put it away casually, then sealed the opponent's cultivation level and picked her up. The young man wanted to run, but Ling Han caught up with him in a single step and similarly picked him up. After Lu Muyu herself had been captured, she still maintained her fierce manner and was still making threatening gestures. But when she saw that the young man was captured, she had turned pale in fear and shrilly screamed, "Let go of my brother! If you dare touch a single hair on his head, I will kill you. I swear, I will definitely kill you." Ling Han shook his hand, and a series of cracks rang out. At least 1/3 of all the bones in Lu Bao's body had been shattered from the force. He looked at that young man again, and the latter turned pale in fear. He could not help but begin to shiver, and the seat of his pants was wet. He had actually peed himself in fear. "Don't kill me! Don't kill me!" the young man wailed. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry, I am not a butcher, so I do not know how to kill pigs. But for someone who likes to humiliate women so much, I will let you have a taste of the same experience." When they had strolled around just now, he had seen a brothel that catered deliberately for men that had unique tastes. It was filled with gorgeously dressed men. As for Lu Muyu, just like how he had said previously, she would be sent to a single man. Chapter 1695, Stakes. Chapter 1695, Stakes. After dealing with the Lu siblings, Ling Han was in a good mood and returned to the inn with the Empress. The application of entry into the city had not been approved yet when the Empress sensed the opportunity for breaking through. She did not leave the city. This secondary city was no smaller than Dark Moon City, so it was fine for her to find any mountain forest that was unoccupied. There was no need to worry that she would bring disaster to others. Furthermore, in the Celestial Realm's case, the heavenly tribulation that was endured by Genesis Tears would not involve much of a commotion actually, because the structure here was too sturdy, so the destructive power would naturally not be overwhelmingly strong either. The Empress soon returned from enduring her heavenly tribulation and advanced first into Saint King Tier. A whole group of people were about to break through, and all requested to come out. Those prodigies who could achieve success even in the ancient realm naturally would advance by leaps and bounds now that they were in the celestial realm, a sacred place of cultivation. At the very least, these people would practically not encounter any problems in cultivation before they reached the severing mundane tier. Of course, wanting to form the pinnacle level of 10 million stars in the Eternal River tier was still incredibly difficult. So far, only Ling Han, the Empress, and the Rain Emperor had accomplished this feat. The good news was that everyone had achieved enough improvement in their grasp of the regulations of the two realms because there were no longer any regulations of two realms in the celestial realm, as they were naturally one here. There was no need to comprehend both, just like they only had to comprehend either the regulations of the immortal realm or the netherworld in the ancient realm, so it was naturally simple. However, it was also precisely because it was so simple that even if the others had merged the regulations of the two realms, they were unable to compare to Ling Han, the Empress, and the Rain Emperor in terms of battle prowess, despite their equal cultivation levels. It was like even the heavens knew that it had been extremely hard for Ling Han and his companions to merge the regulations of two realms in the ancient realm, and so made it so that their battle prowess was stronger. Those who had merged the regulations of the two realms left the Black Tower. There were massive unoccupied wilderness and forests here, and were completely sufficient for them to live in seclusion. They could not stay forever in the Black Tower. After all, they would set up base here, and with this as their base, would develop a new Great Ling Empire. Since a nation could not be established in the celestial realm, it would just have to be called the Great Ling Sect. Ling Han had zero interest in building his own power base, allowing the others to just do whatever they liked. By now, the majority had already left the Black Tower, and only the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden were left by Ling Han's side. The Rain Emperor left alone. He was going to travel all over the celestial realm. His Tao was not suited to quiet cultivation. He had to battle all the way through. Ling Han informed him about the two methods to break through to the severing mundane tier, and the Rain Emperor nodded. He was a cultivation fanatic and did not mind severing his mortal bonds at all, but since he was a cultivation fanatic, he naturally had to aim for the strongest way. Since there was a stronger way for achieving the severing mundane tier, why should he use the normal way? Ultimately, it was not everyone that could deliver this strike onto the heaven and earth. For the sake of immortality, a great many people here would have to sever the mortal bond that they valued the most. Ling Han involuntarily sighed. Returning once more to the inn, he saw that everyone else was waiting for him and the Empress. As it turned out, entry into the city had been approved. Let's go. They arrived at the center of the secondary city. There was a transfer formation, which could directly transfer everyone standing on it to Black Moon City in the skies. Here, Long Galfei first showed the token of entry into the city, then paid as much as 120 star stones, which meant that every person had to pay an entrance fee of 10 star stones. Only then would the guards of the transfer formation allow them to enter, but they did not immediately activate the formation. Ling Han and his group waited for a good while, and after 100 people had gathered here, only then did the transfer formation activate. As it turned out, to save on energy for the transfer formation, it would only be activated when there were enough people. Faced with this kind of rule, even a severing mundane ancestor like Long Galfei did not have the slightest sliver of a temper. He was only a first severance Grand Elder, and while there were not as many severing mundane ancestors in a 2-star city as carp crossing a river, there were definitely a few thousand, and there were many that were stronger than him. If he dared act arrogantly, then he would be suppressed at any time. What more when there were dividing soul tiers in Black Moon City? Wong, the transfer formation shone with white light. Everyone could feel a slight tug on their bodies, and they had already arrived at another location. There was similarly a transfer formation, but it was different from the previous one. They had already arrived at the true Black Moon City. What dense spiritual qi! Mao Shuyu and the others all exclaimed in surprise. They had never been to a 2-star city before, and this was their first time feeling such dense spiritual qi, so they were naturally excited. Long Galfei similarly was slightly excited, but his expression did not show it. He lowly said, "Let's go to the relay station first." The Black Moon sect had set up the relay station deliberately for these visitors from their subordinate cities to make it easier to administer, and it would also be easier to find anyone if they needed to pass on any messages. The relay station was in a very remote location, a whole 7 days' journey from the transfer formation, and at this time, there were already many people from a considerable number of cities that had arrived. When they saw Long Galfei bringing his group, some of them greeted him, while some glared at him. The relations among these 200-plus forces, under the rule of the Black Moon sect, were very complicated. Some of them had feuds, some were branch families descended from certain clans, and some were allied through matrimony, while others yet were sworn enemies. The celestial realm also had ancient sites and mystery realms, so it was inevitable that fighting over treasure would happen. Thus, it was really too easy for enmity to develop. As it happened, the Black Moon sect did not interfere at all in matters of internal strife. For example, if the 3 great clans of Dark Moon City were capable of conquering Bayou City, they could completely make this city their own as long as the tribute that they should pay did not decrease. This was equivalent to indulging their subordinate forces. Otherwise, Dark Moon City would not need to spend a large volume of their resources on the city walls. This actually was the biggest expenditure of their yearly income. Precisely because of this kind of enmity and grudges, if anyone drew an enemy city during the competition, a bloody fight was inevitable and casualties were completely normal. After they settled down, Long Galfei told them to rest well, and not to go out and cause any kind of trouble no matter what. This was the main city of Black Moon City, and anyone here could possibly have the backing of a 3rd severance, 4th severance, or even dividing soul tier. Putting aside the fact that they were only Genesis tiers, even Long Galfei could be killed without giving him any bit of face at all. Another 2 days later, the participating teams from the over 200 cities had all arrived. Long Galfei left for a while, and brought back some information with him. This piece of information recorded the stakes of each representative team of the various cities emerging victorious. Correct. Every time this kind of competition occurred, it was a distinguished event for Black Moon City, and all the forces could place a bet on every match in the competition. They could also make a wager on the winning team in advance. The earlier the bet was placed, the higher the stakes would be. The logic was very simple. As the competition progressed, the number of participating teams would swiftly decrease, so the stakes naturally would be adjusted accordingly. And to the participating teams, this table showing the stakes was also a ranking of strength from a certain point of view. We are ranked at the 224th place. After Mao Shuyu swept an eye over it, she immediately jumped up. This was really looking down on them too much, actually giving them the stakes of 122. There were only a total of 237 one-star cities under the administration of the Black Moon sect, and they were actually ranked 14th from the back. Yet Ling Han shook his head mentally. Why weren't they ranked last? That way, the stakes would be even higher, and he would be able to earn even more money. Chapter 1696, Requirements for Ascending onto Celestial Clouds Island. Chapter 1696, Requirements for Ascending onto Celestial Clouds Island. The participating teams could not place bets on the victory or defeat of their own team, but they could bet on the other teams. Of course, it was completely fine for them to bet on their own team becoming the champion. This was something that could not be cheated. Bets could be made in the relay station itself, and both Ling Han and the Empress bet all their wealth on Dark Moon City, with stakes of 122. With the present stakes, as long as they won one match, these stakes would fall to at least stakes of 1:5. Thus, it was best to bet early. Mao Shuyu and the others were all confident in Ling Han, and they, too, took out their full wealth and bet on Dark Moon City. In the eyes of the staff of the gamble house, this was absolutely normal. Any participating team would basically bet that they would become the champion. This was a kind of self-confidence. Unfortunately, it was destined that only one team could charge out of the ranks and become champion. Not too long after, Long Gaofei also came over to place a bet. He was a severing mundane ancestor, so his bet was high. He actually placed a bet of 100,000. This probably was not his individual wealth, either, but was rather betting on behalf of the three great clans. After they returned, the profits would definitely have to be divided equally among them. This time, your chances of winning are very high. However, you must not be careless either, Long Gaofei said solemnly. I have just gotten some detailed information about some teams, and there are a few teams that are extremely strong. According to the usual rules, the top 8 teams from the last competition would automatically enter into the final rounds, and the remaining teams would have to compete over 24 slots for the final rounds. Being able to rise above the others, these 8 strong teams naturally were incredibly powerful. The champion of the last competition was Double Extreme City. Their previous strength only allowed them to advance into the finals, but in the last competition, a top prodigy named Yuan Xingping had appeared. In the last competition, it was he who had single-handedly brought Double Extreme City into the finals and seized the first place. And now, this Yuan Xingping had still not advanced into the Severing Mundane tier yet, but the Severing Mundane pool would be opening soon after. He had more than 90% chance of becoming a Severing Mundane tier there. Thus, it was possible that this competition would be the last time he ascended onto the stage and made a public appearance as a Genesis tier. Yuan Xingping was determined to win the first place this time. It was rumored that a big shot of the Black Moon sect had already extended an olive branch to him. Once he had advanced into the Severing Mundane tier, that VIP would take him as a disciple, so he needed to show as perfect a performance as possible. Aside from Double Extreme City, there was the veteran strong team, White Sun City. They had always been regulars among the top 4, and they had managed to charge into the final rounds in the last few competitions. They were the champions in the competition before the last. This team did not have a super genius like Yuan Xingping, but every single person's strength was quite balanced, and their cooperation was very well coordinated as well. Who knew, they might be able to pull Double Extreme City off their pedestal this time round. The top 8 teams could not be underestimated, but aside from the top 8, there was another team that had to be noted seriously, and that was Blue Flame City. That was because an incredible prodigy whose name was Dan Yujing had appeared in their team. She was known as the second Yuan Xingping, which showed how highly she was regarded. Like Yuan Xingping, her individual strength was incredibly strong. It was said that she had the ability to fight 100 all on her own. However, this kind of competition was ultimately the battle of 10 people. If one's teammates were too lame, it was still possible that they would lose and be left only with resentment. There were still 10 days before the official competition would begin, and teams like them would first have to draw lots to decide which set they would be in. In the beginning round, a large number of teams would not be drawn. They only had to see which 37 teams were so unlucky to be drawn for the first round. Ling Han and his group's luck was not too bad, and they were not drawn for the first round. To ensure that the competition was relatively fair, lots would be drawn again after every round of battles, so they still did not know whom they would be matched up against. Ling Han, Mao Shuyu, Weibo, and the others all came over. After the matter of Ding Xiaoqian, a clear divergence had appeared in the team of 10. Ling Han, Mao Shuyu, Weibo, Qin Hanyu, and Luo Xinyang had clearly formed their own little group, while Ding Xiaoqian was on better terms with the other 4 members. What is it? Ling Han was sipping tea with the Empress in the courtyard. This tea was naturally made from the reincarnation tree leaves. As the aroma of the tea wafted, it formed multiple patterns of great Tao. With the present condition of the reincarnation tree, even a severing mundane ancestor would feel a rush of excitement for this kind of tea leaves. Ling Han extended a hand, and regulations spread out, blocking the patterns of great Tao that exuded from the reincarnation tea. It was best not to reveal one's valuables inadvertently. He had no wish to become the target of even more severing mundane tears. Mao Shuyu and the others did not suspect anything and exclaimed, "Come quickly. There is a test outside, and as long as you reach the set standard, you will be able to go to Celestial Clouds Island tomorrow night." Celestial Clouds Island? Celestial Clouds Island is a large meteorite-orbiting Black Moon city that is the living quarters of the present Holy Son of the Black Moon sect. Mao Shuyu's eyes were filled with stars. This Holy Son is a prodigy that would be rare to come by even in countless eras. It is said that he has formed 10 million stars in the eternal river tier and is a living legend. 10 million stars. Ling Han's heart throbbed. That was truly a proud achievement, capable of matching him, the Empress, and the Rain Emperor. They all said that only the holy sons and holy daughters of large sects could achieve this kind of prodigious achievement. It was reasonable to say that the Black Moon sect was not qualified to be called a large sect yet. At least, an Immortal Palace tier force could only barely be qualified. For a 2-star force to be able to produce such a prodigy was indeed extraordinary. This holy son is called Changsun Liang. It is said that he is only over 100,000 years old, yet has already attained enough comprehension of cultivation level. Once the Severing Mundane pool opens, he will be able to become a Severing Mundane tier. Mao Shuyu continued, clearly having done her research, and was a firm supporter of this holy son. It was unknown whether Zhang Chang's face would turn green with envy if he had witnessed this scene. Luo Xinyang nodded and said, "The Severing Mundane pool is the best location for Severing Mundane in the territory under the rule of the Black Moon sect. If one could successfully sever the mundane there, he would be much stronger than his peers even after advancing into the Severing Mundane tier. Too bad. We are still a very long time away from breaking through into the Severing Mundane tier, and if we miss the Severing Mundane pool opening this time, we will have to wait another 10 million years." Qin Hanyu shook her head. Even though they were already peak stage Saint Kings, it was very common to be stuck for a few 100 million or 1 or 2 billion years between the Saint King tier and Severing Mundane tier. Ling Han's interest was piqued by this holy son, and he asked, "What test do we have to undergo?" "Come, it's very simple." These people pulled Ling Han along with them, but no one dared make any kind of intimate contact with the Empress because the Empress's intimidating aura was too strong, so they did not even dare to come too close to her. The Empress followed behind them, and the 6 of them arrived outside. They could see that a pillar had appeared outside the doors of the relay station abruptly, and there were multiple holes on it. When they arrived, there just happened to be a person that was attacking this whole pillar. With a wong, rows of holes lit up one after another. A total of 4 rows lit up, and there were 10 holes in each row, but only 3 holes lit up on the 5th row. 43 holes, just barely considered an elite, but still not qualified to ascend onto Celestial Cloud's island. At the side of the pillar, there was a young man seated in a cross-legged position, making his assessment. He had a head of red locks, which was very eye-catching. The person who had struck just now was defiant and retorted, "I have been watching here for quite some time, and all those before me have only managed to light up 30-plus holes. I have lit up more than 40, and that is still not enough?" "Not enough." The red-haired young man shook his head. "You're inferior to even me, and you still dream of gaining the favor of Lord Holy Sun?" He didn't stand up. With a casual movement, he delivered a punch through the air towards the stone pillar. Wong. Rows of holes immediately lit up, actually reaching as many as more than 50. The gap was clear. Firstly, he had struck the pillar from a distance, and secondly, he was merely seated and delivered a casual strike. If he tried his best, he would probably be capable of achieving as many as 60 holes, or even 70 holes. Chapter 1697. A record that drives others to despair. Chapter 1697. A record that drives others to despair. Everyone inhaled sharply. Even a follower of Changsun Liang was already so awesome, so just how strong was that Holy Sun himself? The red-haired young man swept an eye over the gathered masses, a condescending smile at the corner of his lips, and announced, "With a single strike from Lord Holy Sun, he can simultaneously light up 99 of the 100 holes on the pillar." Hiss, 99. Everyone gaped, appearing to be incredibly stunned. Most of them had tried, and even if there was an extremely wide gap of power between them, the difference in the number of holes was only 1 to 2, and the total would be more than 30. But with this difference of more than 60 holes, just how wide was the gulf in battle prowess between them and the Holy Sun? This was practically unthinkable. And this was the strength of the Holy Sun of the Black Moon sect. Others did not even have the right to look up at him. Then, how many holes would have to be lit up to gain the right to ascend onto Celestial Cloud's island? A person in the crowd suddenly asked. That was a young man that was very average-looking. He was half a head shorter than most people, so only his voice was heard. However, after he said these words, the people in front of him all got out of the way, making it so that he would stay out. The red-haired young man glanced over, and his pupils involuntarily shrank slightly as a coldness rose up from the bottom of his heart. His whole person shot up from the ground, and he had entered a state of wariness. It was as if what he was looking at was not a person, but rather a ferocious beast from the primitive times. Which one of the people that had appeared here was not a top prodigy? And when they saw this, they were all surprised. The red-haired young man was actually scared to this extent. Could it be that this short young man was very strong? They could not tell, because they themselves were not strong enough. Ling Han nodded mentally. This short young man's strength was indeed superior to the red-haired young man's. The red-haired young man wiped the cold sweat on his forehead before he answered, 70 holes, and you may ascend onto Celestial Cloud's island. Then, he cast a look at the short young man again, his eyes filled with wariness. The short young man nodded with a smile and said, Then I'll give it a try. He walked out and arrived in front of the hold pillar. Then, he paused, turned his head, and asked, How many attempts can be made? 3. The red-haired young man had broken out in a cold sweat again, feeling like he was being stared at by a terrifying giant beast when the other party looked at him. This was too frightening. The short young man smiled and balled his right hand into a fist. Then, he very casually threw out his fist at the hold pillar. Wong, multiple rows of holes lit up. 7 rows had lit up completely, and 1 hole on the 8th row had also lit up. 71 holes. Everyone was astonished. So there really was someone that had battle prowess that could light up more than 70 holes? They had not managed to do so, because they were far from being strong enough. How should I address you, sir? Faced by powerful strength, the red-haired young man also became respectful, losing the arrogant demeanor that he had previously shown. Swift Lightning City, Bianjia, the short young man replied casually. His eyes were fixed on the hold pillar, and his expression had also become solemn. Though he had attained the right to ascend onto the island, there was no joy in his expression. Instead, he appeared incredibly cautious. He had only lit up 71 holes, but Changsun Liang could reach as many as 99 holes, so just how big was the gap between the two of them? "I'll give it another try," Bianzhe said, and began building up power. Roar! The roar of a beast rang out from within his body, sounding a bit like the roar of a dragon, but also similar to the roar of a tiger. After the roar was heard, those standing around him actually collapsed directly. What astonishing strength! He had not even struck yet, and only a single roar was enough to subdue his enemies without fighting. Ripples of a strong aura surged out from his body and pushed those gathered around him into a continuous retreat like a tsunami. What peak stage Saint Kings? They were not strong enough to resist at all. In this manner, the true elites immediately appeared clearly like Ling Han. The Empress and over a dozen other people were all standing proudly where they were, none taking a step back. But elites on the same level were still divided into different classes. Some people were only barely standing, while Ling Han and the Empress were completely indifferent. When they unleashed their aura, that was what true terror was. Bianzhe unleashing his aura was not for the purpose of showing off or to injure any enemies, but rather to build up enough power for a powerful move, which caused his loss of control over the aura in his body. Prodigies would all be defiant. This whole pillar was the medium of competition between himself and Changsun Liang. The latter managed to light up 99 holes, and if he could not manage to light up even 99 holes, then no matter how abundant his battle experience was, he would only lose with resentment in the face of being overwhelmed by absolute power. He finally moved, and it was still a punch. However, there was a mass of lightning wrapped around his fist this time round, and one could clearly see multiple patterns of great Tao throbbing there, forming multiple dragons of lightning. Pong! As his punch landed, the glow of lightning spread out, shaking the world. When the glow of lightning disappeared, rows of holes also began to light up on the stone pillars. It was still 8 rows, and the first 7 rows had lit up completely, while 9 holes had lit up on the 8th. What? Such a frightening attack only increased his record from 71 holes to 79 holes. He had not even broken through to 80 holes. 99 holes, this was practically a record that would drive others to despair. Hiss, just how strong was the Holy Sun, Changsun Liang? Bianzhe had no choice but to admit defeat. He looked dumbly at the hold pillar, his face bearing a desolate expression. At first, he had thought that he was already standing at the highest peak of Saint King tier, and only he had the right to look down on others, but only now did he find out that there were others that were stronger than him. This gap was too large, so large that he did not even have the confidence that he was able to surpass this record. So even if their cultivation level was the same, the gap between them could still be this wide. However, Bianzhe himself was also someone that others would have to look up to. 79 holes, this was the best record as of now, and he was the only person who had gained the qualification to enter Celestial Clouds Island. If just anyone could become a guest on Celestial Clouds Island, then true prodigies would definitely ignore this with disdain, and would be too embarrassed to join such a group. But even an elite like Bianzhe only managed to get a result of 79 holes, which caused the top prodigies to feel their fighting spirit rise. Just how many holes can I light up? Many thought. Ho ho, I will give it a try as well. A young man in white walked out, bearing an elegant demeanor. His outward appearance was much better than Bianzhe's. However, his strength was inferior to Bianzhe's. Even with using a powerful move, he had only lit up 74 holes. Though there was only a difference of 5 holes, the gap was still very, very big between the two of them. However, he still gained the serious regard of the others. They were sure that he would definitely demonstrate extraordinary skill in the competition 10 days later. Every time such a competition was held, it was the time for such prodigies to shine as brilliantly and dazzling as fireworks. Prodigies continuously appeared. Though there were a few others who had achieved lighting up more than 70 holes, there was still no one that had broken through the impressive mark of 80 holes. Mao Shuyu, Wei Bo, and the others also approached to make an attempt, but even if they had summoned their own god tools and tried their best, the strongest, Mao Shuyu, only managed to light up 62 holes. There appeared only to be a gap of 8 holes, but it was unknown how much she would have to improve her strength to be able to catch up. Perhaps she could only light up more than 70 holes after a few tens of millions of years of accumulation and increase her number of stars to 20 billion or 30 billion. They were just egging Ling Han on to make an attempt as well when a commotion suddenly broke out in the crowds. "Look, Yuan Xingping is here." Among such exclamations, the crowd subsided like floodwaters, allowing a single person to walk through. Yuan Xingping, the publicly acknowledged top elite of this competition. Chapter 1698, The Empress Moves, 92 Holes. Chapter 1698, The Empress Moves, 92 Holes. Yuan Xingping was dressed in black, and there were multiple rows of golden silk on the fabric. Upon closer look, patterns would be flickering on them occasionally. This was a treasured armor, but whether it was meant for strengthening attack or defense was unknown. He was incredibly handsome, his hair black and shiny, and his complexion glowing like jade. His appearance was the type that even other men would feel their hearts beat faster when they looked at him. An extremely beautiful man that other men would want to make bent. But that was Yuan Xingping. Even those who preferred their own gender would not dare show their interest in him. Yuan Xingping walked over as if he was strolling, walking very slowly and casually over. Even if there were more than 1,000 pairs of eyes fixed on him, he was still unhurried and relaxed, his art of composure control very well practiced. Everyone did not have the slightest feeling of wanting to hurry him either. This young man's aura was too astonishing. It was like he was an emperor who had ventured out. Who would dare rush him? Finally, he had arrived in front of the hold pillar and stopped. Faced with this young king tier that had risen up aggressively, even that red-haired young man appeared very reverent. He took the initiative to greet him first and said, "Greetings, Brother Yuan." Yuan Xingping only nodded slightly. There was no need for him to take the other man seriously at all, but this red-haired young man presently represented Changsun Liang, so he still had to give him some face. He looked at that hold pillar, and then casually threw out a punch. Wong, the stone pillar shook strongly, and then as many as 9 rows of holes lit up. 82. As expected of Yuan Xingping, too strong. Finally someone has reached more than 80 holes. No wonder Yuan Xingping managed to bring Double Extreme City to become the champion single-handedly. This really is boundless strength. Everyone exclaimed in admiration. Though they were all in a competitive relationship, cultivators had always respected strength, and Yuan Xingping was indeed deserving of their admiration. Yuan Xingping wrinkled his brow slightly. He hesitated for a moment and did not make another attempt. This made everyone feel curious. Some guessed that he was deliberately preserving his strength, but there were also those who said that even if he tried his best, he might not reach more than 90 holes, so it would be better to quit while he was ahead, leaving a hint of mystery to his persona. After Yuan Xingping, a few more prodigies appeared, but they all achieved only 70-odd holes, and he was still the only one who had reached 80 holes and above. Ling Han go. Mao Shuyu and the others had begun to egg Ling Han on again, but things were really very coincidental. At this moment, another commotion broke out among the masses. Dan Yujing had come. In the recent 100 years, she had emerged as a new force to be reckoned with, like a shooting star streaking across the skies, leaving behind dazzling accomplishments. Who knew how many excellent Saint Kings had been defeated by her? And she was also known as the only person who could make Yuan Xingping go all out in this competition. Her white skirts fluttered, her black locks cascading down like a waterfall. Her beauty was elegant and refined, and a great many people who had not seen her before had immediately fallen in love with her at first sight. Fairy Dan, the red-haired young man again, took the initiative to greet her. In this round of elites, only these 2 people were worthy of his serious regard because Changsun Liang had said, "These 2 people are quite interesting." Since Lord Holy Sun had said thus, he naturally dared not slight them either. Dan Yujing also gave the other face and nodded slightly in reply. Then, she looked at the hold pillar and suddenly delivered a palm strike. Wang, her slender hand was as fair as jade and looked incredibly pleasing to the eye, but one only had to see the patterns of great Tao that had condensed beneath her palm, and there would definitely be no one who dared to have any inappropriate ideas about her. Wang, her palm landed, and majestic light immediately surged out of the hold pillar. It was practically blinding to the eye, and then row after row of holes shone. Even better than Yuan Xingping's result, but she had clearly built up power. Though this might not be her strongest performance still, if one were to judge that she was stronger than Yuan Xingping with just this, it would definitely be very unjust. Ling Han, go on. Mao Shuyu and the others were egging on Ling Han for the third time, hoping that no one would cut in the line this time round. Indeed, no outsiders cut into the line, but the Empress stood up first. Today, she was dressed in a red skirt of silk. Previously, Ling Han had kept her in his arms, and now that she had walked out, her tall, slender figure immediately drew the attention of others. The Empress strode forwards, exuding the unique air of dignity that belonged to a king tier, and others wanted nothing more than to kneel beneath her feet and surrender their petty and low souls to her. That red-haired young man, too, stood up involuntarily. He did not know why he had done so himself, and when he had suddenly come back to his senses, he was already standing respectfully with bowed head, as if he was facing the holy son Changsun Liang himself. The Empress naturally would not take it to heart. There was no significance whether others respected her or otherwise. She stretched out her unadorned hand and pressed down lightly on the hold pillar. It was a flawless jade-like hand, and others would salivate at how beautiful it was. This blow was incredibly ordinary, and there was no frightening aura surging out, nor was there any flickering of great Tao. It was like she was simply greeting someone. Pa! Her palm pressed down on the hold pillar. It was very light, but the hold pillar still shook slightly, and row after row of holes lit up consecutively. 10 rows. The first 9 rows had lit up completely, while 2 holes on the 10th row had lit up. 92 holes. At this moment, everyone was dumbfounded, their eyes open wide and their heads completely numb, even feeling suffocated. A light strike, and as a result 92 holes had lit up. This definitely was a light palm strike. If she had tried her best, regulations of great Tao would definitely have appeared. And such a strike was enough to light up 92 holes, so how powerful would she be if she tried her best? 99 holes. 100 holes? Heavens, this was an absolute king tier that was not the slightest bit inferior to Changsun Liang. The Empress did not make another attempt. She only wanted to know what estimated level her strength was capable of reaching, and that was enough. Ling Han broke into a slight smile. After the Empress broke through to the Saint King tier, her battle prowess had indeed improved further. Otherwise, even if she had tried her best, she would probably only have managed to light up 90 holes. But now, 99 holes should not be her limit. Dare I ask the esteemed name of this celestial maiden? The red-haired young man appeared to be even more respectful. Luan Xing, the Empress answered calmly, walking towards Ling Han. It was clear that the red-haired young man wanted to find out even more information and took a step forward, just about to speak further, when the Empress directed a glare at him. He immediately stepped backwards. Meanwhile, Ling Han smilingly asked, "May I ask if one can bring their family members if they go to Celestial Clouds Island?" The red-haired young man was distracted. Only after a while did he nod his head and answered, "Yes, but one can only bring a single friend with them at most." Ling Han smiled at the Empress and said, "Wife, then I will have to bask in your glory this time." The Empress also smiled, though it was unfortunate that no one could see her unmatched beauty. Seeing this scene, the people in the area wanted nothing more than to beat Ling Han to death. "You deadbeat, aren't you ashamed of yourself?" Ling Han wrapped his arm around the Empress's slender waist and glared demonstratively at the others. He was showing off. Even if you guys were defiant, what could you do? "Fairy, please wait." Yuan Xingping walked over and said, "I recently gained a celestial technique, and it is said to have been passed down from a dividing soul tier elite. Does Fairy have any interest in studying it with me?" Hiss, a dividing soul tier level celestial technique. Everyone was both stunned and rueful. Yuan Xingping was really nature-defying, actually managing to obtain a celestial technique of this level. Yet now, he was willing to take it out to study it with another, showing that he had definitely fallen in love at first sight with the Empress. She had not even shown her true face, and a prodigy was already enchanted by her to this extent. However, the others did not feel that this was anything strange at all. If it was them that had a supreme celestial technique, they would also be willing to take it out and share it with the Empress. Being able to develop a close relationship with the Empress, whatever price they had to pay would be worth it. Chapter 1699, Going to the Island. Chapter 1699, Going to the Island. The Empress only swept an eye over Yuan Xingping coldly and ignored him. She continued walking forwards. Fairy. Yuan Xingping felt embarrassed and stretched out a hand, wanting to stop her. Tong. The Empress moved, and Yuan Xingping was immediately sent flying. With an exclamation, he was throwing up blood like mad. Everyone was once again astonished. Who was Yuan Xingping? He was the largest reason that Double Extreme City had been able to become the champion in the last competition, and it could even be claimed that he had single-handedly won first place for his team. Yet in front of the Empress, he was not on par with his opponent at all. Gods! Luanxing? Which city does she belong to? Dark Moon City. Hiss, Dark Moon City must be the champion this time. In the last competition, Yuan Xingping had brought the first place back for Double Extreme City single-handedly, and now the Empress was even stronger. So what doubt was left about the question? Some smart people had already thought that they should quickly go and make a bet on Dark Moon City getting first place. Mao Shuyu and the others were also dumbfounded. They only knew that the Empress was very extraordinary with her 2-star aptitude, but who would have thought that she could actually be so strong? She could be a match for the Holy Son of the Black Moon sect. Phew! Ling Han chuckled and returned, his arm around the Empress's slender waist. The Empress was incredibly proud. For the sake of being with Ling Han, she had given up the option of competing for the position of captain, but it did not mean that her aggressive nature had vanished. On the other hand, she was prouder than anyone else. Thus, when she displayed her own prowess, it would be so stunning. When the news spread out, some immediately hurried to make a bet on Dark Moon City winning. But the Gamble House's information gathering was not slow, either. They immediately adjusted the stakes for Dark Moon City. Furthermore, it was reduced to the maximum, decreasing to stakes of 100:101. This was practically firmly believing that Dark Moon City would become champion / But after only 2 hours, the stakes of Dark Moon City were actually adjusted upwards again. Though it had not reached as exaggerated a level as 122 again, it was still stakes of 1:4, which was very shocking. Who was dumb? Everyone immediately went to ask around, and only then did they find out that the Empress was not in the participating team of 10 at all. Fuck, no wonder the stakes were adjusted upwards again. True, how could a prodigy that was Changsun Liang's equal possibly appear in a small Dark Moon City? She had to be the holy daughter of some large sect, encountering Ling Han when she was traveling outside, and then had her heart stolen by that brat with some unknown means. Wayaya, so envious, so jealous. This really was lucky. In the minds of everyone, no matter what, Ling Han could not possibly reach the height that was the Empress's equal, so how could it be anything but a spot of luck? No, who knew? He might have used some underhanded tricks. Otherwise, even if the holy daughter of a large sect was blind, she would not have fallen in love with the cultivator from a small city. This despicable, shameless man. The Empress's charms were too strong, causing Ling Han to become famous overnight as well. However, his reputation was the exact opposite of the Empress' renown. It could be claimed that his reputation was horrible, and he had completely become a target of scorn that everyone wanted to beat up. Ling Han felt very wronged. He had only basked in the Empress's glory a little, so how had he become so wicked beyond redemption all of a sudden like this? This is really a bunch of shallow people. I was only too lazy to make my move, fearing that I would scare you guys too badly. He laughed the matter off. At the time, he had only thought that it would be fun, and he had not imagined that it would actually draw so much antagonism to himself. After finding out that the Empress was so strong, Long Gaofei was also shocked. However, the name list of participants had already been reported, so it was impossible even if he wanted to make any changes by now. He couldn't help but sigh in despair. It was clear that the Empress was so powerful, so why had she not shown this strength previously? About this issue, the Empress only had a one-word reply: troublesome. Her tsundere nature actually had effect even on a severing mundane ancestor. Long Gaofei was not angered at all, but made a firm decision that they definitely had to try hard to gain such a prodigy. When they returned to Dark Moon City, he had to think of some way for a son of the Long clan to seduce the Empress. What a joke! The strength of her battle prowess was close to the strongest prodigy of the Black Moon sect, and in comparison, what was Ling Han worth? Even if she had married, they could still be broken up. As the saying went, if the bait was good enough, there was no one that could not be seduced enough. How could it be that the Long clan did not have any young, handsome sons? And there would definitely be a type that suited the Empress's tastes. A day later, a luxurious carriage drove over. This was the vehicle that Changsun Liang had deliberately sent to pick up Ling Han and the Empress. The coachman was an old man who looked very lean, and was a peak stage Saint King. He respectfully invited Ling Han and the Empress to board the carriage. Of course, this bit of respect was primarily targeted at the Empress. As for Ling Han, he did not take him seriously at all. Just a mere great saint. Mao Shuyu and the others were all incredibly envious, yet could only watch as the carriage left. Even though Long Gaofei had not come out, he had still swept over them with his divine sense, which rippled slightly. To be honest, those who resided on the floating islands were all the powerful figures of the Black Moon sect. Even he had never been qualified to step on one, and now, 2 juniors had accomplished this feat before he had, which naturally turned him jealous and sour. The carriage soon rode on the winds and flew in the air, heading towards Celestial Clouds Island. These floating islands all orbited around Black Moon City, and their speed was considerably quick too. Thus, if one wanted to step on an island, it was not a good idea to chase from behind. It would be better to approach it from the front. The coachman was naturally very experienced. Very soon, he had steered the carriage onto the floating island, and after inviting Ling Han and his companion to alight, he drove the carriage off. He still had other guests he had to pick up. Ling Han and the Empress sized up their surroundings. At present, they were in the middle of a wide road, and not too far ahead of them was a towering grand castle surrounded by beautiful gardens, blossoms flourishing and bright. Multiple rocks of various sizes were scattered around, and there was an unspeakable rhythm to it. They had not taken another step when they saw a carriage swiftly fly over from Black Moon City, and it landed steadily on the floating island. This was actually a war chariot, and was covered all over with marks left from a battle, exuding an air of age. It was being pulled by a 3-headed silver dragon, a peak stage Saint King. This was a strong type of demonic beast. If its skin could turn from silver to gold, it would be able to break through to the severing mundane tier and become an immortal beast. The chariot did not have a coachman. A divine beast like the 3-headed silver dragon had naturally long since gained intelligence, but its wild nature was clearly difficult to tame. When it spotted Ling Han and the Empress, its 3 heads were all spitting out a cold air, disdain flickering in its gaze, and it actually attempted to crash into them deliberately. The Empress was furious, and her beautiful eyes glared as her imperial intimidation surged out. The 3-headed silver dragon was immediately scared witless. With a creak, it veered off course and charged out of the main road, crashing into a gigantic rock with a bang. With this crash, the rock was immediately turned into pieces, and the 3-headed silver dragon had also become dizzy. Like it was drunk, its footing was shaky and swaying. The carriage door opened, and a young man walked out from within, his expression holding a strong fury. What was going on here? Why would the chariot have suddenly break out of nowhere like this? He saw that the chariot had veered off course, and his mount was looking completely dazed. He involuntarily cast his eyes on Ling Han and the Empress and menacingly asked, "How dare you? You actually dare scare my mount? Are the 2 of you tired of living?" Chapter 1700, Enemies on a Narrow Road. Chapter 1700. Enemies on a Narrow Road. Your mount attempted to commit a crime by crashing into us, and without asking the rights and wrongs of the matter, you immediately shouted at us and found fault. How could anyone be so overbearing and unreasonable? The Empress's expression immediately darkened. She was merely staring coldly at this young man, and her imperial intimidation seeped through the air. In this instant, it was as if the heaven and earth had crumbled, making one feel heavy to the point of suffocation. The young man was also overwhelmed by this aura, but he clearly was a person that was used to being arrogant. Once he got back to his senses, he became even more furious, his head of black locks fluttering wildly, and looked as if he wanted to swallow someone alive. What a joke! He was the most beloved descendant of the Tong clan's ancestor. When had he been treated with such despise from another before? Brother Lin, what happened? A woman's voice was heard from within the carriage. Very soon, a woman with a graceful figure also walked out. Her features were quite beautiful and very enchanting, yet the sight only made Ling Han feel that this was really a small world. This woman was Lu Muyu. It's you. At first, Lu Muyu's complete attention was on that young man, Tong Lin, but after she happened to glance at Lu Muyu and the Empress, she immediately jumped up in anger. The last few days were practically a nightmare. Her cultivation level had been sealed, and she had been tossed to an old bachelor. Thankfully, with continuous threats from her, the latter did not dare use force on her, and when she burst through the seal that Ling Han had placed on her cultivation level, she immediately ran off to save her brother. However, that brother of hers was an idiot. He had been scared witless once he had entered into that place, and only knew how to call out no, no. What was the use of that? He had been our **ed horribly. When she saw how her brother had developed a psychological trauma and would immediately scream shrilly at the sight of any man, Lu Muyu's hatred towards Ling Han had reached never-before-seen levels. Why was this brother so important to her? That was because this was not her brother at all, but rather her son. However, having a child out of wedlock was a scandal to the Lu clan, especially when Lu Muyu was a prodigy of cultivation who could join another clan to their clan through marriage and gain the support of a powerful force. If the scandal that she had birthed a child out of wedlock spread out, what powerful clan would want her then? Thus, her son became her brother. Lu Muyu indeed had her ways. She came from a one-star city, White Haze City, but in the short few days since she had entered into Black Moon City, she had already made a connection with the Tong clan. The Tong clan was a severing mundane clan, and their ancestor was a fourth Severance Grand Elder. Though it was not considered a top-tier force in Black Moon City, Lu Muyu's ultimate motive was not the Tong clan, either. Instead, she wanted to make use of the Tong clan to pave her entry into the upper class of Black Moon City. And thus, she had managed to get her hands on a slot of entry into Celestial Clouds Island. You know them? Tong Lin asked Lu Muyu with a dark expression. Lu Muyu's expression was similarly livid. She wanted nothing more than to devour Ling Han's flesh and drink his blood. She harshly replied, "It was they that hurt Bauer." Just who are they? Tong Lin asked first. As a profligate of Black Moon City, he was still aware that there were some people he could not trifle with. I met them in the secondary city. Lu Muyu did not undermine the identities of Ling Han and the Empress and merely related facts. However, she believed that this was enough. As expected, Tong Lin immediately showed an expression of arrogance, and his fury increased even further at the same time. Anyone who would stay in the secondary city had to be waiting for their application of entry into the main city to be approved, but if they had a powerful background, there was also a fast route into Black Moon City too, which was specially for the use of powerful figures. For example, if any visitors came from other 2-star cities, or a 3-star city had sent an envoy to pass on a command, how could it be that they would have to wait over a dozen days before entering? And from this, it was clear that the identities of these two people were definitely ordinary. They had to have come from a 1-star city recently. Weren't they about to host a cultivation tournament? So, this fitted the timing. These two people had to be representatives that had come from some small city. Though the Tong clan was only a severing mundane level force, they were located in the seat of power, so they naturally deemed themselves to be superior to the rest. How could Tong Lin not be furious? A country bumpkin from a small city actually dared block the way of his mount. If this spread out, what face would he have left? "Kneel," he declared coldly. "Slap yourself, and don't stop unless I tell you to. Let's go, wife. This guy must be a retard." Ling Han embraced the Empress and could not be bothered to deal with this kind of brainless guy. Tong Lin streaked out in a single move, barring Ling Han's and the Empress's path while furiously exclaiming, "Do you know who I am?" "We know." Ling Han smiled with a nod. "Didn't I say it just now? You are a retard." "Fuck you." Tong Lin repressed his anger and then said, "I am Tong Lin, and the ancestor of my clan is a 4th Severance Grand Elder, and also a 4-star Elder of the Black Moon Sect." There were many classes of Elders of the Black Moon Sect, categorized according to their cultivation level. For example, a 1st Severance would be 1 star, 2nd Severance would be 2 stars, and after they had advanced to the Dividing Soul tier, Yang Soul would be a 5-star Elder, Yin Soul would be a 6-star Elder, Earth Soul would be a 7-star Elder, and Yang Soul would be an 8-star Elder. An 8-star Elder would basically be able to stand on the same level as the Sect Master, but even the Black Moon Sect only had a mere 3 8-star Elders. Perhaps there were ancient antiques that had lived in seclusion for countless years without making an appearance, but this number should not exceed as many as 5. Tong Lin's expression was filled with arrogance. Though the ancestor of the Tong clan was only a 4th Severance Grand Elder, which was equivalent to the strongest elite of a 1-star city, didn't he see that there was still the official position of a 4-star Elder of the Black Moon Sect? This meant that the Tong clan's ancestor would be superior even in the face of other 4th Severance Grand Elders. Ling Han smiled slightly and countered, "So? What did Ling Han mean by it?" Tong Lin was a little blank. After announcing such a frightening background, shouldn't the other party be scared out of his wits, and he could do as he liked with them? Why was the conclusion completely different from what he had imagined? "Hiss, you guys were not acting according to the script here." "Brother Lin." Lu Muyu also walked over. Her eyes were filled with venom, but her expression was filled with concern as she said, "Forget it. Don't argue with them. They are very strong. I'm afraid." "What are you afraid of?" Not only did this persuasion not soothe Tong Lin's fury, it spiked his flames of anger even higher. "I am Tong Lin, so how could it be that I will be unable to deal with these people? What I want is precisely this attitude." Lu Muyu pretended to lower her head in grievance. Without stoking the flames, how could she make it so that Tong Lin would become stubborn, and how would she make use of him to do her dirty work for her? She knew that Tong Lin was definitely no match for Ling Han, but that was fine. Tong Lin was the most beloved descendant of the Tong clan's ancestor, and if the latter knew that he had been beaten, how could he swallow his fury? Ling Han swept an eye over Lu Muyu. This woman was really an evil snake. It looked like his previous punishment had been too light, and she hadn't learned her lesson at all. He smiled calmly and said, "Spring Chicken, just how do you plan to deal with us?" "Spring Chicken?" Tong Lin almost leaped up. Tens of thousands of years ago, he was already not a spring chicken, all right? "You can't call me Spring Chicken just because my surname is Tong." To him, this address of Spring Chicken was practically a colossal insult. Having not had S*X for a tens of thousands, it definitely had to be because he had a problem in that area. "In front of the prestige of our Tong clan, you are destined to suffer the consequences of your own actions." Tong Lin declared coldly, "I'll give you one last chance. Immediately kowtow and beg for my forgiveness. Otherwise, humph." "There really are many retards." Ling Han moved, and with 2 sounds, knocked both Tong Lin and Lu Muyu unconscious. He tossed them into the bushes in the distance, and then, after some thought, removed their clothes. These 2 naked pigs were piled on top of each other, and from the surface, it looked like they were doing that activity. "Wife, let's go by carriage." Ling Han stretched out a hand to the Empress. The Empress agreed gladly and boarded the chariot, while Ling Han steered the 3-headed dragon, heading towards the castle ahead of them. Chapter 1701. Public S*X. Chapter 1701. Public S***. The three-headed dragon was naturally defiant and even planned to resist Ling Han. But Ling Han merely released his aura slightly, and this divine beast was instantly terrified out of its wits. It obediently became their mount. There was not one path that led to the castle, but rather 5. When Ling Han steered the carriage and arrived, he saw that there were already a great many carriages parked there. They were in various shapes and sizes, and there were very many of them. A considerable number of people had not entered into the castle yet, but were rather standing here, as if they were waiting for others. Brother Tong Lin is here. When they saw the chariot approach, 3 men immediately came over. They were Tong Lin's best friends, and could also be called his gang. Because their clan's power was not as strong as the Tong clan's, Tong Lin was also their leader. When they saw that it was Ling Han steering the carriage, they couldn't help but feel curious. When did the dragon chariot need a coachman? The three-headed dragon had long since gained intelligence, so did it still need someone to steer it? Furthermore, this coachman was actually just a great saint. His cultivation level was a little too low, wasn't it? No matter what, it should have been a saint king at least. And under their eyes, Ling Han opened the carriage door, inviting his wife to alight. Since the Empress was already in the limelight, he decided to simply become the background. Today, he was here to set off his wife. The Empress walked out. Her figure was tall and slender, so her head could almost touch the top of the carriage door. She wore a golden skirt woven from the highest grade of saintly material. The ingredients had come from the mountain bandit's lair, and it was naturally Ling Han who had hurriedly created it in the last few days. Her bearing was unmatched in the first place, and added with being set off by this saint-grade treasured robe, she immediately became the center of attention of the whole area. The veil on her face also added some mystery to her persona, filling others with unending desire to catch a glimpse of her true face. Gasp! Brother Tong Lin really has good luck with women to actually get hold of such an exquisite beauty. You haven't seen her face yet, so how do you know that she is exquisite? Fuck, with this kind of bearing and this kind of figure, if she is not an exquisite beauty, I will cut off my own head to become a ball for you. The 3 men all showed stunned expressions and couldn't help but whisper amongst themselves. The other people in the surroundings were also the same. The Empress's bearing was really too strong. She could become the center of attention of any place at any time. With her there, all other women would only be pure background, and completely pale in comparison. She is Luan Xing. What? The super genius who lit up 92 holes with a single strike yesterday. Hiss, I have heard of her name, but I never imagined that her bearing would actually be so enchanting. She must be the holy daughter of a major sect, or how else could she possibly have such astonishing natural talent, strength, and bearing? Strange, this is clearly the Tong clan's chariot. With the strength of the Tong clan, how could they possibly manage to make a connection with her? Everyone was confused. There were not more than over a dozen people who had passed the test of strength of the Hold Pillar, but Changsun Liang also invited the young generation of the various forces of Black Moon City. Thus, there were many gathered here. Everyone knew everyone else, and though Tong Lin's natural talent in cultivation was not too bad, compared with the Empress, he wasn't even worthy to tie her shoestrings, and the Tong clan was far from being enough to make a connection with a large sect. There was something strange about this matter. Ling Han broke into a grin, and his mischievous nature burned bright. Who asked him to be friends with the large black dog? He coughed and said, "Let me give everyone an explanation. We met Tong Lin on our way here, but Tong Lin went into the bushes with his female companion on a spontaneous whim, and allowed us to have his chariot, saying that there was no need to worry, and that he would be arriving soon." A spontaneous whim, going into the bushes with his female companion? Everyone bore a strange expression. Could it be that Tong Lin's SE*UL desires suddenly surged, and he couldn't help but want to satisfy them immediately? That's not right. Even if he wanted to do that, wouldn't it be better inside the carriage? Someone asked curiously. None of their carriages were ordinary, and they had protective formations. They could even block a powerful attack, so being shake-proof and soundproof was even easier. Who knows, Maybe Tong Lin likes doing it outdoors. The possibility of being discovered at any time, having the taste of a clandestine love affair. This is not a bad idea. I will have to give it a try sometime. Shiminda, you keep staring at the wives of others. Aren't you afraid of karma? This piece of news was more explosive. Everyone could not help feeling their desire for gossip burn and became busybodies. Just at this moment, another carriage steered over, and a young man alighted from it with a beautiful female companion by his side. However, he wore a very strange expression on his face, and the moment he came down, he hurriedly exclaimed, "You guys would never guess what I saw on my way here." He paused, seeming to leave everyone in suspense, and then continued, "There was actually an illicit couple engaged in public S**X. Just guess, who was the man?" "Fuck, it really was him. Tong Lin," everyone replied, seemingly all at the same time. The young man from before was dazed for a moment. "Fuck, so you guys had all already seen it." At first, everyone was just skeptical, but now hearing these words from this young man, it was equivalent to having been given solid proof. So even if they could not believe it, they had no other choice. TSK, this Tong Lin was really not picky. He was already close to the castle, and still wanted a roll in the bushes. If Changsun Liang found out, this young king tier would definitely be furious. "You actually came to have public S**X in my territory. Just how much of an insult was that to me?" Everyone immediately decided to separate themselves from Tong Lin. Otherwise, it would be terrible if they were to be implicated by their connections to him. How could Changsun Liang, a king tier that had withdrawn from worldly affairs, destined to have a future filled with boundless prospects, be easily offended? "Come on, we should head in." Everyone had no further interest to greet and chat with their friends here any longer. Even Tong Lin's 3 friends turned around and left, wanting nothing more than to pretend that they had never met Tong Lin before. The cast was very big. Thus, even though they were clearly at the main entrance, they had still spent some time to make their way into the main hall. There were already rows of tables that had been arranged here. The tables were not very big and could only accommodate 2 people sitting side by side. This was also why the red-haired young man had said that every person could only bring a single companion. There was a plaque that was placed on each table, and a name was written on it. The meaning was very clear here. Everyone was to be seated according to their corresponding plaque. That was good too, as it would prevent any arguments from breaking out. Ling Han and the Empress found their places. However, only the Empress's name was there. As for Ling Han, today, he was merely there to join in for the meal. He did not care at all, and sat down in a cross-legged position, starting a quiet conversation with the Empress. The table was very low, so there was no need for chairs. Instead, there were mats on the floor, and one could sit on them. And after Ling Han sat down, he was involuntarily slightly surprised because a heat from within the mat entered into his body, and it actually had the effect of increasing origin power. However, he had now reached the peak stage of Great Saint, so such benefits had no effect on him. As expected of a holy son, even what he used to receive his guests was such high-grade articles. Immediately, Ling Han felt an urge to have this for takeaway. This could be given to Feng Piyun and the others. Though the effect was not especially strong, every little bit counted. If they could speed up their accumulation of origin power a little, then why not? "Hey, just guess what I saw when I just came over." A person called out very excitedly when he had just entered into the main hall. Tong Lin having public S**X. A few people immediately replied in disapproval. "Oh." The person who had just entered was immediately stunned. And here he thought that he had discovered a huge piece of news. Chapter 1702. Where is Tong Lin? Chapter 1702. Where is Tong Lin? Every new person who arrived would excitedly talk about the explosive event that they had witnessed, but cold water would be immediately poured on them. Wasn't it just something as minor as public S**X? But this Tong Lin was really outrageously bold in his lust to actually dare have public S**X in Changsun Liang's official residence, Tisk. He was destined to be in trouble. Everyone naturally couldn't be bothered to waste time on him, and they were all minding their own business, connecting with friends that they had not seen for a very long time, or developing new friendships. Black Moon City was really too big. Ordinarily, everyone indeed rarely had the chance to gather together. More and more people arrived. The actual host, Changsun Liang, had yet to appear, but the Empress had already become the center of attention, everyone gathering around her firstly to gain her favor, and secondly to make discreet inquiries about exactly which large sect the Empress originated from. The Empress didn't even bother to respond, and it was Ling Han who became her spokesperson, dispatching everyone who had come. However, he did not coldly offend anyone. Who knew, these people might be of use in future. Furthermore, they hadn't offended them either, so what need was there for him to insult them? Right after more than an hour had passed, Changsun Liang finally arrived. The arrival of the Holy Sun. With a soft exclamation, the whole main hall immediately became silent. Light footsteps were heard, and a young man wearing a purple gold crown was striding out of a set of doors. His figure was broad and tall, and his eyes were very bright, as if they were two suns, and no one dared to stare at them. His bearing was also incredibly strong, especially within the diameter of 3 feet away from him. His aura had solidified and turned into multiple true dragons, true phoenixes, and other divine beasts like Qilin and black tortoises, which were endlessly turning over around him. And that red-haired young man stood behind him, a fanatical expression on his face, as if Changsun Liang was a god instead of a human being in his eyes. Our respects to the Holy Sun. A considerable number also knelt down, and the others stood up as well as they clasped their hands in respect. This was an unmatched king tier, with talent so high he was first in a 2-star force. He would not be afraid of even a prodigy that had walked out from a 3-star city and could match, or even surpass, the latter. Of course, neither Ling Han nor the Empress stood. With their pride, how could they possibly bend at the waist to a cultivator that was their equal? This caused those in the surroundings to feel uneasy. If the Holy Sun became angered, would they also be cracked down on? Rise. Changsun Liang stated calmly, pressing down with his hands, indicating that everyone could sit back down. His eyes swept over Ling Han and the Empress, and a smile curled his lips as he greeted her with clasped hands. Fairy Luanxing. The Empress did not even look directly at him, and only nodded slightly. She had greeted him. It was this kind of prideful attitude that caused everyone to firmly believe that the Empress had to be the holy daughter of some great sect. Neither my strength nor natural talent was inferior to yours, and my status was more noble, so I could naturally put on airs. Changsun Liang could be said to have been mildly rebuffed, but he appeared to be very magnanimous and broke into a smile, as amiable as a spring breeze. Come, I have prepared some wine and food, so do not be reserved, everyone. His eyes swept over the gathered masses, and his brow wrinkled slightly. That was because practically all the seats in the main hall were occupied, and there was only one person missing. Tong Lin. He had already appeared, yet Tong Lin was not here yet. He was putting on even greater airs than himself. Changsun Liang couldn't help but show a hint of displeasure, and asked, "Where is Tong Lin?" Pooh. Some people had already begun to drink, and when they heard this, they spluttered, and coughs rang out. What's going on? Changsun Liang looked at the side. The red-haired young man understood his meaning, and immediately nodded in respect. He descended the stage, and after some inquiries, his expression suddenly became extremely strange. Tong Lin was actually having public S**X in the bushes right outside the entrance. Just how many F***King years have you not seen a woman that you have such a fierce craving? The red-haired young man hurriedly returned to the stage and whispered lowly by Changsun Liang's ear. He had not even finished his words when Changsun Liang couldn't help but look furious. He almost slammed his hand on the table and stood up in indignant rage. That bastard, Tong Lin, was actually having public S**X in his garden? Furthermore, it had become a publicly known fact. Wasn't this a public humiliation to him? How outrageously bold of him. It could not be said that Changsun Liang's composure was weak. This matter was indeed infuriating. It was just like someone had purposely crapped in your bed. whose face would not turn dark at that. However, Changsun Liang did not fly into a temper. He only acted as if he had not discovered this matter and greeted his guests. He was the Holy Son, destined to inherit the position of sect master in future, so he was naturally an expert of guiding the mood. Very soon, he made everyone forget the matter of Tong Lin, and the topics of conversations were within his control. Changsun Liang was very interested in the Empress. After all, this was the only young king tier that was capable of matching him. Furthermore, her identity was very mysterious, and she could possibly be the holy daughter of some great sect. Just ask, who would not like such a woman whose natural talent was nature-defying and had a noble status, a perfect figure, and an unmatched bearing? Even if she had not shown her face, the Empress had already conquered the hearts of innumerable people. Fairy Luan Xing, after we finish later, would you be interested in studying the art of cultivation with me? Changsun Liang was not reserved at all and began a fierce offensive towards the Empress. The Empress couldn't even be bothered to pay him any regard. If Changsun Liang had said that he wanted to spar with her, she might be more interested in battling. Ling Han laughed and said, "My Luan never spends time alone with strangers. If Brother Changsun is insistent, I can do so on her behalf." "You? How would you do so on her behalf?" Changsun Liang showed a sliver of displeasure. The words, "my Luan," pierced his heart painfully. But what could be done? What position did he have to refute Ling Han's words? A thought flashed in his head, and he immediately had an idea. He turned to look at the red-haired young man and communicated a message through his divine sense. Then, he smiled and said, "In a meeting of us cultivators, how could we not have any spars and competitions of martial arts? The Holy Son speaks true." Everyone nodded, naturally not daring to undermine his plans. "Ling Han, I challenge you." The red-haired young man immediately stood up and called out towards Ling Han. Ling Han was surprised. At first, he only wanted to be a quiet young man, have some food and wine, and meet the young prodigies of Black Moon City, but someone actually wanted to challenge him. He didn't show his true prowess yesterday, so others thought he would make a good target. "Sure." He nodded, all smiles. "Qi Long, be appropriate in your strikes. Do not kill anyone," Changsun Liang said to the red-haired young man. The red-haired young man understood. This was Changsun Liang's command. As long as he did not kill anyone, there was no need for him to hold anything back. He nodded and respectfully replied, "Yes, Lord Holy Son." He leaped out of the main hall and called out, "Ling Han, come out for a battle." Ling Han picked up a mouthful of food with his chopsticks and sipped some wine first. Then, he turned to the Empress and said, "Wife, I will be back soon." The Empress nodded gently and then took the initiative to kiss him. This scene caused everyone to almost die of envy. At first, they had thought that the Empress was a beauty of ice that was cold and proud, yet they had never thought that she would smile in such a dazzling manner for a man, as gentle as ******. This guy who has gotten so fuck lucky, go and die quickly. Chapter 1703, Unlucky Fool. Chapter 1703, Unlucky Fool. Even Changsun Liang could not control his expression from darkening. His hands balled tightly into fists. He felt an urge to commit murder. Ling Han pushed the table away, stood, and slowly walked out of the main hall. At this time, everyone also flooded out in droves. They wanted to personally see how Ling Han was going to be utterly beaten and thrashed, or they would not be able to suppress this fury in their hearts. They would be burnt to the extent of suffering severe injury if that was the case. The Empress walked lightly and elegantly. Her bearing was incredibly strong, and no one dared to walk into the vicinity of 9 meters from her. There was an exception. Changsun Liang quickly walked forwards and walked side by side with the Empress. His face held an expression of shock. Sometimes, there was no need for any actual exchange of blows between elites, and they would be able to distinguish the strength of the other upon contact with their aura. The Empress was really very strong, so strong that he did not even have the absolute certainty that he could defeat her. This did not make him jealous, but instead filled him with a boundless adoration for her. How could an ordinary and common woman be qualified to be by his side? This was the woman that he had always been waiting for, his destined partner. Ling Han and the red-haired young man stood about 30 meters away from each other. The structures on this floating island were especially sturdy and were completely capable of sustaining the impact caused by Genesis' tears, so they did not need to battle in the skies. Everyone was filled with confidence in the red-haired young man. Though he was only Changsun Liang's attendant, being capable of becoming Changsun Liang's attendant was enough proof of his strength. Even if an ordinary Saint King knelt on the ground and begged, Changsun Liang would not even give him a second look. 3 moves, the red-haired young man declared proudly. If he went all out, he could light up 71 holes on the hold pillar, which was not much inferior to many of the elites who had come today. Giving himself a limit of 3 moves was already giving himself an extremely wide space of allowance. Yuan Xingping, Dan Yujing, Bianjia, and the others were all looking at Ling Han. From a certain aspect, they were of the same camp with Ling Han, so they naturally did not hope that Ling Han would lose. Yet the fact that Ling Han managed to come here was completely because of his connection with the Empress, so how could others trust in his battle prowess? They hoped that he could withstand the full 3 moves. If he was defeated at the first blow, then even they would feel embarrassed. Ling Han chuckled and said, "Since you have already said 3 moves, then let it be 3 moves." Everyone did not know what his words meant. Only the Empress understood that Ling Han would only defeat his opponent by the 3rd move. First move. The red-haired young man moved. He tapped out a finger from a far distance. Boom! A tiny flame surged out and turned into a furious arrow that shot swiftly towards Ling Han at an incredibly quick speed. The bloodline of the dragon tribe flowed in his veins. By nature, he was an expert in using fire. The power of this fiery arrow was very frightening. Ling Han smiled slightly and blew out a breath of air towards the fiery arrow. With a pop, the fiery arrow had been extinguished. He said, "Today is not my birthday, so there is no need to make me blow out any candles." Yeah? Everyone was also surprised. No one had thought that Ling Han's strength was actually so powerful, being able to extinguish the red-haired man's attack with a single strike, which was hard to believe or accept. The red-haired young man was also slightly stunned, but did not think too much of it. The first strike was only a probe. He formed his hands into claws and said, "Then come take my second strike." Boom! A powerful aura surged out of his body, and his spine protruded as if it had become a giant dragon. Heavenly dragon furious claws. He moved, his 2 hands pressing out. Immediately, multiple dragon scales covered them, and they had become the claws of a dragon. They were as long as 15 meters as they slashed towards Ling Han. A true dragon would soar above the 9 heavens and was praised as the strongest divine beast. This was not just mere words. Multiple patterns of great Tao appeared on his dragon claws, and the power of regulation was channeled through them, so the mere sight of them would make anyone's heart shudder. This young man, no matter where he was, could be called a prodigy, but he was only the attendant of Changsun Liang in this place. Ling Han smiled slightly. Darkness of the paramount night spread out, enshrouding the red-haired young man completely. Under the boundless darkness, no one could see the red-haired young man anymore. Even Changsun Liang was no exception, and he showed a hint of shock. He couldn't help but ponder. If it was he that was fighting with Ling Han, and he was currently trapped by the darkness, how would he get out of this dilemma? Tong! In a mere instant, the red-haired young man had already charged out of the darkness, which made Changsun Liang involuntarily feel abashed, and he thought that he had made too big a fuss over a minor issue. Even Qilong had so easily charged out, so what more when it was him? But the smile that had just appeared on his lips was immediately withdrawn, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Because the red-haired young man had already charged over, yet the course of his attack had been diverted. At first, it was heading towards Ling Han, but now it was charging towards the side, and could not even touch even a corner of Ling Han's robes. The red-haired young man's second strike was rendered unsuccessful once more. Everyone was stunned. If Ling Han had seriously resolved the red-haired young man's attack, then everyone could believe it no matter how strong his abilities were. But he had simply blown out a breath of air and created a darkness to resolve his attacks, and this was completely baffling to the others. Unfathomable depths. Hiss, could it be that he was also a super genius? Third strike. The red-haired young man could already feel the pressure. He had struck 2 consecutive times, yet was not able to even sound out Ling Han's true strength. In this third strike, he definitely had to be cautious. He began to build up power for a strong move, dragon chi ascending all over his body. Pa, pa, pa. His clothes were forcibly burst, but there was no need to worry that he would expose himself, because his body was already covered with a thick layer of dragon scales. Ascending Dragon Strike. This was his strongest and most powerful move. Through burning his ancestral bloodline, he could deliver an earth-shattering blow. It could be said that with the explosive power of this move, he could even match an elite who could light up 80 holes. Of course, he could only maintain such a state for 3 breaths' time, at most. Charge. He charged towards Ling Han, and with his furious shout, the roar of a dragon rang out through the heaven and earth. Ling Han did not dodge or evade. When the red-haired young man pounced over, he stretched out his hand in a grab and already grabbed the red-haired young man's neck. With a casual shake of his hand, at least half the bones in the red-haired young man's body was broken, and his limbs were instantly drooping like he was a dead man, no longer having the slightest bit of battle prowess left. 3 moves, he said with a smile, and then he threw the red-haired young man at Changsun Liang's feet with a casual toss. Only now did everyone know what Ling Han meant when he agreed to limit the battle to 3 moves. With his strength, he was completely capable of defeating the red-haired young man in a single move. Yuan Xingping and Dan Yujing became cautious at the same time. Though they, too, could defeat the red-haired young man, they would definitely not have done it as easily as Ling Han had. This was a strong foe. Previously, they had worried that Ling Han was not strong enough, which would make them embarrassed as well, and now they felt that Ling Han was too strong, so he would become a threat to them. A flash of anger involuntarily flickered in Changsun Liang's eyes. Ling Han tossed the man right in front of him. What was he trying to say? Was this a demonstration of force? Lord Holy Sun, you have to give me justice. Just at this moment, a person forcibly pushed his way through the crowd, his face filled with grievance. It was Tong Lin. Changsun Liang's fury was irrepressible in the first place, and now, seeing the sudden appearance of Tong Lin, he couldn't help but vent all his fury on the latter. Immediately, he shot out a palm strike. Pa! Tong Lin was immediately rendered into a rain of blood, both his form and spirit destroyed. This guy was really an unlucky fool. Chapter 1704, One Move. Chapter 1704, One Move. If Tong Lin still had awareness after death, he would definitely be very depressed. Why did Changsun Liang kill him? There was completely no logic to it. He had been awoken by the commotion created by the battle between Ling Han and the red-haired young man. The moment he awoke, he discovered his embarrassing state, hurriedly drew out some clothing to change into from his spatial god tool, and anxiously ran over to tell on Ling Han. He was sure that Changsun Liang would definitely demand justice for his sake, but he had never imagined that Changsun Liang would kill him with a single palm strike without another word. He was really unlucky to the extreme. Blood was still splashing in the air, and a few drops sprayed onto Lu Muyu's face, causing her running steps to come to an abrupt stop. Only now did she realize that Tong Lin had died, and he had actually been killed with a single palm strike from Changsun Liang. What's going on? Her face had turned completely pale from fear, her legs trembling, fearing that Changsun Liang would follow up with another blow and kill her as well. Lord Holy Sun, spare me. Lord Holy Sun, spare me. She knelt, her tears pouring like rain. She was indeed a completely unreasonable, incredibly ferocious person, but that would depend on who was in front of her. Changsun Liang showed a hint of disdain. This definitely had to be the cheap SL*T who had engaged in public S*X with Tong Lin, such a asterisk was actually able to come to his residence? Scram! He rebuked loudly. Yes, yes, yes. Lu Muyu did not even dare to say another word, and hurriedly turned around and ran. Changsun Liang took a deep breath, regaining control of his emotions. Only then did he realize that he had gone too far with his actions. No matter what, the Tong clan was a fourth severance force. But since he was already killed, he would not keep thinking about it with his personality. He looked towards Ling Han, a slight smile appearing on his lips. He began to clap loudly. Exciting, truly exciting. Everyone was speechless. You were so furious that you killed Tong Lin, and now you are clapping your hands in praise. This was really too fake. However, this person was the holy son of the Black Moon sect, so who would dare approach and rebuke him? Changsun Liang continued, Is there anyone who would like to spar with this person? No one answered. From Ling Han's previous performance, he was definitely of the same level as Yuan Xingping and Dan Yujing, his strength extremely overwhelming and strong. Though Black Moon City was a 2-star city, and there were many, many more prodigies here than in a 1-star city, there really were not many the likes of Yuan Xingping. Moreover, even if they were, they might not have the absolute certainty that they could defeat Ling Han. No wonder the incredibly proud Empress had chosen him. This was definitely not an idiot that only had his looks going for him. Changsun Liang's expression was slightly awkward. There was actually no one that was willing to move out. Who was he? Could it be that he would have to personally stand against Ling Han? Changsun Liang humphed in displeasure. They didn't even want to give this little bit of face to the one and only holy son. Ho ho, as untalented as I am, I would like to ask for some guidance from this brother. A young man emerged from the crowd. He first bowed slightly towards Changsun Liang before turning to face Ling Han. Immediately, Changsun Liang's expression looked considerably better. This young man was the prodigy of the Xiang clan, Xiang Wenkuan. He was very strong and capable enough to gain his approval. With Xiang Wenkuan moving out, this matter was assuredly resolved. Ling Han faintly and said, Come on then, I will give you some guidance. Xiang Wenkuan showed a hint of anger. When he said guidance, he was only being polite. He had not thought that Ling Han would take him literally. Humph, he was just a country bumpkin that had come from a tiny 1-star city. He really had an exaggerated opinion of his strength. It made sense. After he had gained some strength, he was naturally invincible in a small city, and thought that there were no other elites in this world, and became unbearably arrogant. What ignorance! Then let us fight. He did not bother to waste words, and made a hooking motion with his finger towards Ling Han. Ling Han smiled slightly, raised a single finger, and said, One move. Hiss, everyone inhaled sharply. You wanted to take Xiang Wenkuan down with a single strike? Where had this courage come from? On the contrary, Xiang Wenkuan was so angered he smiled, and declared, Then let it be one strike. He stared at Ling Han, his origin power channeling. A sword-shaped mark appeared in the middle of his brow, and a primitive, ancient intimidation radiated out, making everyone feel as if a large rock was weighing down on their hearts, which was incredibly uncomfortable. He had used a strong move. This was the power of his battle prowess, being able to draw on the powers of their ancient ancestors, increasing his battle prowess greatly. Victory with a single strike. Ling Han crossed his arms behind his back and allowed his opponent to prepare for his powerful move, looking like he had completely no intention of moving to interrupt him. Nor did he plan to make any preparations for his own powerful attack. Arrogant, everyone thought. That was Xiang Wenkuan here, and even if it was Yuan Xingping or Dan Yujing facing him, they would have to be extremely cautious. If they did not go all out, they would definitely be obliterated and turn into dust in an instant. Frozen Divine Sword, Xiang Wenkuan exclaimed, and tapped on his forehead. Shio, that sword-shaped mark actually turned into a divine sword that slashed out. Suddenly, the temperature in the surroundings began to drop madly. Everyone in the area felt as if their blood was about to freeze in their veins, and when they wanted to move about, they discovered that their limbs had already been frozen stiff, with a thick layer of ice having formed on their bodies. Hiss, this was only a secondary effect, and its might was already so frightening. If one was really struck by this frozen divine sword, would there be any chance of survival? This strike was so fast that it was indescribable. But Ling Han smiled faintly and calmly tapped out a single finger, which just happened to tap on the tip of this sword. So accurate, so fast. Everyone exclaimed in shock in their minds, but then they immediately shook their heads. The coldness that this sword exuded was so terrifying, and you actually met it with your bare hand. Wasn't that simply courting death? Pa! The icy sword immediately shattered, but the coldness had been completely transferred to Ling Han, freezing him instantly. Xiang Wenkuan involuntarily showed an expression of pride. This was the consequence of angering him. Boom! A flame ignited from Ling Han's body, and the layer of ice instantly melted. Ling Han's finger continued to tap out, growing to the size of a mountain peak, and pressed down on Xiang Wenkuan. Xiang Wenkuan paled in shock. The range that this finger covered was really too wide. There was absolutely no way for him to dodge. He could only explode with his full power and throw a series of punches at the skies. Boom, boom, boom. Punches landed on that finger one after another, yet they did not have the slightest effect. The giant finger fell without obstruction. Boom! Xiang Wenkuan's figure had immediately disappeared. When Ling Han lifted his finger, they could see that Xiang Wenkuan was already sprawled out on the ground. One move, he had indeed used only a single move. Even as strong as Xiang Wenkuan was, he had already prepared a long time to build up enough power to unleash a strong move. Yet he had still been dealt with by a single move. Just how wide was the gap in power between the two of them? It should be known that Ling Han had not made any preparations at all, and had only very casually flicked out a finger. This time, even Changsun Liang was moved. He looked at Ling Han and said, 3 eras ago, a Mao Dai appeared in Dark Moon City. He swept aside all other young prodigies and was known as a supreme prodigy. If it was up to me, I would say that you were much stronger than Mao Dai had been at that time. This was a very high assessment. At the time, Mao Dai had defeated all the Saint Kings and emerged as a powerful force of his own. Even now, it was still discussed enthusiastically. This was indeed a super genius, and even the Fu clan had the intention to take him in. His future achievement would definitely not be limited to merely the fourth severance. But Changsun Liang actually said that Ling Han was stronger than Mao Dai had been. Wasn't that a little exaggerated? You are worthy of having a battle with me, Changsun Liang declared proudly. He was already standing at the peak stage of Saint King tier, and was only waiting for the severing mundane pool to open, and he would be able to sever his mortal bonds and become immortal. In a battle of equals, he was confident that he was unmatched. Chapter 1705. Changsun Liang makes his move. Chapter 1705. Changsun Liang makes his move. Ling Han smiled and said, I have always been an easygoing person. Since you wish for a battle, then I'll play with you. Play? Who would dare say that they could play around in a fight with Changsun Liang? Mao Dai was indeed a super genius, but it was not that there were absolutely no other prodigies that could be his equals. For example, in Dark Moon City itself, there was a Ding Yaolong. It was just that there was a whole clan behind Ding Yaolong, so it was definitely impossible that he could gain the full patronage of the Fu clan or the Black Moon sect, unlike Mao Dai, who could become a member of the Fu clan or the Black Moon sect just by marrying into these forces. Yes, if Mao Dai had suppressed his cultivation level to the level of the Genesis tier, it was definitely impossible that he could be a match for Changsun Liang. This was a rare prodigy that would be hard to come by even in several tens of thousands of eras, and no one knew how strong his battle prowess would be against an opponent of equal cultivation level. That was because there had never been any one of his peers that could force him to show his full battle prowess. Changsun Liang chuckled. He was seated in a high position, so there naturally was no need for him to drop down to the same level. He crossed his arms behind his back and slowly walked out. He said, I'll let you have the first 3 moves. I'll let you have the first 10 moves. Ling Han grinned. Changsun Liang's smile involuntarily froze. This was really arrogance to the extreme. He did not speak further and pointed out a finger at Ling Han. Wang, a frightening pressure surged out, as if the heavens themselves were about to collapse. Ling Han similarly pointed a finger, meeting Changsun Liang's incoming attack. Pong! The two attacks immediately crumbled. He did not follow it up with another strike, but rather kept to the promise he had made previously, letting Changsun Liang have the first 10 moves. After this exchange, there was no more noise to be heard from the surroundings. Ling Han had already shown very powerful strength, easily defeating both the red-haired young man and Xiang Wankuan, but there was still not a single person that thought that he was capable of standing against Changsun Liang. Changsun Liang, an invincible existence among his peers. But now, Ling Han actually blocked a blow from Changsun Liang. Though it had only been a casual strike, it was clear that Ling Han had also not used his full strength, either. Could it be that a third Supreme King tier would appear in Black Moon City? Changsun Liang smiled and flicked out a finger. Shio! Another flash of saber ray slashed over. Ling Han shot out a flash of sword chi, easily countering this second attack from Changsun Liang. 3 moves, 4 moves, 5 moves, very quickly, 10 moves had passed. Changsun Liang again crossed his arms behind his back and said, "The 10 moves are over, make your move." Ling Han did not continue to be reserved and leaped out. He did not use any celestial technique and was similarly resorting to simple martial arts in his attacks. Changsun Liang dodged and parried, but did not counterattack, similarly letting him use 10 moves first. Changsun Liang was proud and would not condescend to take advantage of Ling Han. After 10 moves, the two of them showed an expression of seriousness. Though neither of them had used their full strength just now, or had engaged in a fierce exchange of blows in a battle of elites, how could it be that they could not see through to each other's depths with just these few moves? A tough opponent. This was the label that they had tagged on the other. Wind-piercing finger. Changsun Liang pressed a finger firmly down on Ling Han. Though he had also shot out his finger like this before, he had not channeled any celestial technique. And now, when he pointed out his finger, the incredibly dazzling light of Great Tao shone brilliantly, shooting out towards Ling Han. Ling Han dared not be careless. Though he was sure that he was completely capable of taking on this kind of attack head-on with his physique, if there was no need, he did not want others to know exactly how strong his physique was. He shot out a punch using extermination lightning. Hong, long, long. His fist was completely covered with lightning, and countered Changsun Liang's attack violently. Z. The light of Great Tao split apart the sea of lightning, but the power of lightning dispersed all its might at the same time. Shua, the sea of lightning split into 2 halves and passed by on either side of Changsun Liang, unable to create the slightest bit of damage. The deeper probe that both sides had sent out still ended in a tie. This caused their expressions to become even more cautious. Aside from the Empress, this was the first powerful opponent that Ling Han had encountered among his peers, filling him with a blazing fighting spirit. He took the initiative to attack, his figure shooting out. Using his fingers like he would a sword, he used the lightning sword technique. This was incredibly quick, and Changsun Liang was caught unawares. Suddenly, he appeared to be a bit rushed. However, he truly lived up to his name as the king tier of the younger generation. Though he was caught off guard, he did not panic. He shot out both fists, delivering one attack after another, and stopping Ling Han from coming any closer to him. After only a few moves, he gradually relaxed, having accustomed himself to this kind of attack. Such adaptability caused even Ling Han to nod mentally. The fact that he could be known as a supreme prodigy was truly based on genuine strength. However, if that was not the case, what interesting would there be about it? It's my turn. Changsun Liang released a battle cry, and suddenly spat out a mouthful of air, which turned into countless blades of wind that streaked towards Ling Han. These wind blades were incredibly frightening. The light of Great Tao was glinting among them, and there were multiple patterns flickering. Its destructive power was practically unimaginable. Everyone was stunned. So as it turned out, Changsun Liang had not just been on the defensive just now, but was also taking the opening to build up power in preparation for a counterattack. Otherwise, such a powerful attack definitely could not have been unleashed just like this. Ling Han only acted as if he had not seen them, and continued to charge out towards Changsun Liang. In the instant that the wind blades were just about to attack him, he used the banishing technique on himself. In a mere blink of an eye, his figure reappeared. With the level of control he presently had on the banishing technique, this separate dimension was already incredibly sturdy. At least, it was not something that Changsun Liang could penetrate with a single attack. He had already charged right in front of Changsun Liang and shot out a punch at the latter. Iron Shield. Changsun Liang humphed, his hands crossing over his chest, sealing off this punch from Ling Han. Ling Han was surprised. He was actually unable to penetrate Changsun Liang's defenses with a single punch. The latter was really quite strong. Changsun Liang quickly followed up with a counterattack. A flash of golden light shot out from his eyes, sweeping out towards Ling Han's face. Ling Han used lightning flash, and his figure swiftly retreated, dodging this attack. Everyone was watching so avidly that they were holding their breath. In the short time of a few breaths, Ling Han and Changsun Liang had already exchanged a good few attacks, and whenever it was one of their turns to take the offensive, everyone would think that the other could no longer hold up, but the result was the complete opposite. Not only had he held up, he even took the opening to release his own counterattack. What a terrifying pair. They really were too strong. Changsun Liang being so strong was within their expectations. Even in the Fu clan, it would probably be very hard for this kind of prodigy to find an opponent that could match him among his peers, but why was Ling Han also this strong? This was illogical. This is great. Changsun Liang's fighting spirit had also been ignited, and he was shooting out one celestial technique after another with ease. He had touched upon practically any kind of regulations. It was really unknown exactly which regulation he had focused on. Ling Han had also grasped a number of celestial techniques himself. His interest was spiked as he continued to battle, and he used the immovable deity metal body mystical power. His 6 arms appeared at the same time, channeling several celestial techniques all at the same time. His battle prowess had increased tenfold. Changsun Liang did not continue to be reserved either. His head of black locks shot skywards, and a small figure walked out of the middle of his forehead. It was only the size of a fist, and was brandishing 2 divine swords that were only as long as an inch, and rapidly sliced towards Ling Han. Though this figure was small and the swords were short, it filled Ling Han with great wariness. Putting aside having the divine swords land on him directly, he did not even want to be touched by the sword light. That is, buried ghost sword, someone exclaimed in shock, his face completely pale. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.